the Infinity Stones were never meant to be used together carelessly. Tony Stark had learned that lesson the hard way on Titan, watching Thanos wield them like toys. But today's mission was supposed to be simple. Intercept a Hydra facility experimenting with Tesseract energy signatures in Eastern Europe. Secure the tech, go home. Simple. The explosion that tore through the Quinjet's hull was anything but simple. We've got a massive energy surge. Tony's voice crackled through the comms as his HUD went haywire with readings that made no scientific sense. The space stone energy is reacting to something. Breach in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Captain America gripped his seat restraints as reality itself seemed to fold around them. Through the cockpit window, the forests of Slovakia twisted into streaks of impossible color. Natasha fought the controls, but the Quinjet was no longer responding to her commands. It was being pulled by something far more powerful than any Earth-based technology. Thor's eyes blazed with recognition and alarm. This is not Midgardian sorcery. The fabric between realms is tearing. Then they were falling. Not through sky, but through the spaces between universes. Through a tunnel of blue-white energy that screamed with power. Bruce Banner clutched his head, fighting the Hulk's emergence as gamma radiation spiked in his cells. Clint Barton checked his quiver by instinct. If they survived whatever this was, they'd need every arrow. The wormhole spat them out above an alien desert. Twin suns blazed in a sky that was subtly wrong. Too bright, too vast, filled with stars visible even in daylight. The Quinjet's engines whined in protest as Natasha wrestled it into a barely controlled descent toward a sprawling settlement of domed structures and adobe buildings. Dust plumes rose in their wake as they skidded across hard-packed sand, finally slamming to a halt near what looked like a massive hangar bay. "Status report," Steve said, already on his feet despite the crash. His shield was on his arm before anyone else had unbuckled. "Everyone alive," Natasha confirmed, running diagnostics. "But we're not in Kansas anymore. These star patterns, I don't recognize a single constellation. We're not even in our galaxy." Tony's faceplate slid up as he stared at the twin suns. "Okay, that's new. Jarvis, tell me you're getting something useful." "Sir, I'm detecting extensive technological signatures throughout the settlement. However, the energy patterns are unlike anything in my databases. I'm registering what appears to be plasma-based weapons technology and propulsion systems that exceed our current understanding of physics." Translation: "We're in someone else's backyard and we have no idea whose," Clint said, notching an arrow as figures began emerging from the nearby buildings. The locals were humanoid but diverse. Some familiar, some decidedly alien. A massive slug-like creature lounged near a cantina entrance. Bipedal creatures with insectoid features haggled at market stalls. And approaching them now were armored figures in pristine white, carrying weapons that looked like nothing from Earth. "Halt!" The lead trooper's voice was distorted through his helmet. "By order of the Galactic Empire, surrender your vessel for inspection. This is your only warning." Steve's eyes narrowed. He'd heard that tone before, the voice of occupying forces, of tyranny wearing the mask of order. He shifted his stance, shield raised. "We're not looking for trouble. Our ship malfunctioned and we crash-landed. We just need to make repairs, and we'll be on our way." The trooper raised his blaster rifle. "You will comply or be destroyed. The Empire does not tolerate." He never finished the sentence. Clint's arrow punched through the gap in his armor plating at the shoulder joint, and the trooper went down with a cry of pain. The other stormtroopers opened fire immediately. Blue energy bolts screamed through the air. Steve's shield rang like a bell as he deflected the first volley, the vibranium absorbing the plasma impacts that would have vaporized a normal man. Natasha rolled behind a cargo crate, her Glock barking as she returned fire with conventional bullets. The Stormtrooper's armor, designed to stop energy weapons, offered far less protection against kinetic rounds. 2 troopers dropped, holes punched through their plastoid chest plates. "So much for diplomacy," Tony muttered as his faceplate snapped down. Repulsors flared to life and he shot into the air, spiraling around incoming blaster fire. "Jarvis, analyze those weapons. I want to know what we're dealing with." "Plasma-based energy projections, sir. Considerably less sophisticated than anticipated. Their targeting systems are rudimentary at best." Tony grinned behind his helmet. "Good to know we've still got the tech advantage. Let's see how they handle this." His palm repulsors lit up and twin beams of concentrated energy lanced out, striking a stormtrooper in the chest and sending him flying backward into a wall. More troopers were pouring out of the settlement now, at least 20 of them forming firing lines. The Avengers took cover behind the Quinjet as blaster bolts peppered their position. "This is getting crowded," Bruce said, his skin already showing the green tinge of transformation. "Maybe we should—" "Not yet, Bruce," Steve said. "We don't know what we're dealing with. Thor, can you give us some cover?" The God of Thunder smiled, a fierce expression that promised violence. "With pleasure, Captain." He raised Mjolnir skyward, and the twin suns seemed to dim as storm clouds gathered from nowhere. Lightning crackled across the suddenly darkened sky, and Thor brought his hammer down. Thunder exploded across the settlement. Lightning arced from Thor's position in multiple directions, striking the sand around the stormtroopers and sending them scrambling for cover. The smell of ozone filled the air as electrical discharge danced across metal surfaces. In the chaos, a new sound emerged, the scream of engines. 3 angular spacecraft dropped from the sky, their wings folded in attack position. They bore Imperial insignias, and their laser cannons were already tracking targets. "TIE fighters!" Someone in the crowd screamed, and the civilians scattered. Tony's threat assessment subroutines went into overdrive. "Okay, now we've got air support. Thor, you want to take those, or should I?" "I believe we can share," Thor said, and launched himself into the air like a missile. Lightning wreathed his body as he shot toward the lead TIE fighter, Mjolnir leading the way. The pilot never saw him coming. Thor smashed through the cockpit viewport with the force of a meteor, and the TIE fighter exploded in a ball of fire and shrapnel. He was already moving toward the second craft, spinning Mjolnir to build momentum. Tony engaged the third fighter in a high-speed dogfight that had Jarvis running calculations faster than ever. The TIE was fast and maneuverable, but it was designed for space combat and atmospheric flight, not for fighting a target that could stop, turn, and accelerate in ways that violated everything the pilot knew about physics. Come on," Tony muttered, leading the fighter in a spiraling climb. "Just a little closer." He cut his repulsors and dropped like a stone. The TIE fighter overshot, and Tony pivoted in midair, firing his unibeam at full power. The concentrated energy beam punched straight through the fighter's hull, and it spiraled into the desert in a smoking ruin. On the ground, Steve had organized a fighting retreat toward the cantina, his tactical mind adapting to plasma weapons with the same efficiency he'd applied to Hydra energy rifles decades ago. "Natasha, Clint, suppressing fire. We need to get off this street before they bring in heavier weapons." But even as they fought, Tony's sensors were picking up something far more concerning. A massive energy signature was entering the atmosphere, and Jarvis's analysis made his blood run cold. "Sir, I'm detecting a vessel of considerable size. Length, approximately 1,600 meters. Power output, exceeding anything in my databases. Classification, unknown. But the weapon's signatures suggest a warship of extraordinary capability." Tony looked up and saw it descending through the clouds. A massive triangular ship bristling with weapons. Its hull a stark gray-white that spoke of military precision. Smaller craft were already launching from its hangar bays. "Avengers," he said quietly. "I think we just made some very powerful enemies. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you." The Star Destroyer loomed above Mos Eisley like a dagger pointed at the settlement's heart. And somewhere aboard that vessel, Darth Vader stood in meditation, sensing something he had never felt before. Warriors without the Force, yet radiating power that made even him pause with interest. The cantina door exploded inward as the Avengers burst through, followed by a hail of blaster fire that scorched the walls and sent patrons diving for cover. The Bith band's music screeched to a halt as a blue bolt vaporized their lead musician's instrument. Alien faces turned toward the newcomers with expressions ranging from terror to curiosity to outright hostility. "Everyone stay calm," Steve shouted, shield raised as he backed toward the bar. "We're not here to cause trouble." A Rhodian bounty hunter reached for his blaster. Clint's arrow was through his hand and pinning it to the table before the alien could clear leather. He said, "Stay calm." Natasha was already scanning exits, her training cutting through the chaos. 2 rear doors, 1 kitchen entrance, ventilation shafts too small for most of the team, but possible for her. Windows facing the street where stormtroopers were setting up firing positions. Bad odds getting worse by the second. "We need a plan, and we need it now." "Working on it," Tony said, his gauntlets retracting as he approached the bar. The bartender, a creature that looked like a walking tumor with too many eyes, backed away nervously. "Easy there, friend. Just need some information. Where are we exactly?" Tatooine," the bartender stammered. "Mos Eisley spaceport. You just attacked Imperial forces. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Defended ourselves," Steve said flatly. "Those soldiers opened fire first." "The Empire doesn't care about first," a gravelly voice said from a shadowed booth. A scarred human with the bearing of a soldier leaned forward. "You killed their men, shot down their fighters. They'll level this entire district to make an example of you." Thor set Mjolnir on the bar with a heavy thunk that cracked the surface. "Then let them come. We do not flee from tyrants, no matter what realm we find ourselves in. You really aren't from around here, are you?" The scarred man studied them with the calculating gaze of someone who'd survived by reading situations quickly. "No hyperdrive signatures, no transponder codes, weapons and armor I've never seen. And you just manhandled Imperial forces like they were training droids. Who are you people?" Before anyone could answer, the entire building shook. Dust rained from the ceiling as something massive landed outside. Through the grimy windows, they could see the distinctive walker legs of an all-terrain scout transport positioning itself in the street, its cannons rotating toward the cantina. "ATST," the scarred man said unnecessarily. "You've got about 10 seconds before they level this place." Bruce Banner's eyes flashed green. "Maybe we should stop running." "Bruce," Steve started. "No, he's right," Tony interrupted, his faceplate snapping back down. "We're not going to solve this by hiding in bars. We need to establish a perimeter, gather intel, and figure out how to get home. But first..." His repulsors charged with a high-pitched whine. "We handle the giant robot chicken outside." The ATST's cannon fired, and the cantina's front wall exploded in a shower of stone and plasma. Steve's shield took the brunt of the blast meant for the group, but the shockwave sent aliens flying. The Walker pilot's voice crackled through external speakers. "Surrender or be destroyed. You have 5 seconds to comply." "I'm really starting to hate that word," Natasha muttered, reloading her Glock with practiced efficiency. "Comply." Clint pulled an explosive arrow from his quiver, the red tip marking it as one of his heavy hitters. "Cap? Permission to not comply?" Steve's jaw tightened. He'd faced overwhelming odds before. Hydra, Chitauri, Ultron's army. This was just another battlefield, another enemy that thought superior firepower meant automatic victory. They always learned the hard way. "Avengers." His shield came up, reflecting the twin suns' light like a beacon. "Engage." Tony shot through the hole in the wall first, repulsors blazing. The ATST pilot tried to track him, but Tony was already behind the walker, analyzing its structure with Jarvis's help. Weak points in the knee joints and neck articulation. Armor's thick, but not vibranium thick. I can work with this. The walker spun with surprising speed, its cannon swiveling. Tony juked left as a blast scorched the air where he'd been. "Okay, faster than it looks. Thor, you want to give this thing something else to think about?" Thunder answered his call. Thor descended from the sky like a meteor wrapped in lightning, Mjolnir leading. He struck the ATST's head module with the force of a tactical strike, and the reinforced durasteel crumpled like aluminum foil. Sparks and smoke erupted from the ruin of the cockpit as the walker staggered, its legs buckling. "One down," Thor said with grim satisfaction. 19 to go, Clint called out. And they all looked up to see more ATSTs deploying from transport ships, along with what looked like larger, more heavily armored walkers with 4 legs instead of 2. Stormtroopers were setting up E-Web heavy blaster emplacements at every intersection. "The Empire is establishing a perimeter," Jarvis reported. "I'm detecting communication signals suggesting they're treating this as a code red scenario. Additional forces are being deployed from the Star Destroyer in orbit." Natasha assessed their situation with cold tactical precision. 6 Avengers, hundreds of enemy troops, alien terrain, no backup, no extraction, no knowledge of local politics, geography, or power structures. "We can't fight an entire army in the middle of a civilian population center. We need to relocate." "Agreed," Steve said. "But where? We don't know this planet. Don't know who to trust. I might be able to help with that." They turned to find the scarred man from the booth standing behind them, a blaster rifle now in his hands, but pointed at the floor in a non-threatening grip. "Name's Rick Tannon, former Republic soldier, now freelance security consultant. Smuggler, if we're being honest. I've got a ship and I know the terrain. The way I see it, you need someone who understands this galaxy. And I could use the kind of muscle that just destroyed an ATST with a hammer." Steve studied him, trying to read whether this was genuine help or a trap. His instincts said the man was telling the truth, but his instincts were calibrated for Earth, and they were very far from home. "What's your angle?" "Survival," Rick said bluntly. "The Empire just saw you drop 3 TIE fighters and wreck a walker. They're going to interrogate every sentient being in this district, and I've got warrants in 6 systems. Helping you makes me complicit, so I might as well go all in. Plus," he grinned without humor, "I really hate the Empire." An explosion rocked the street, as an AT-AT's massive foot crushed a land speeder. The walker's head turned toward them, and they could see crew members scrambling in the viewport, bringing weapons online. "Decision time, Captain," Tony said, his HUD tracking dozens of targeting locks, painting them from multiple directions. "We can make a stand here, or we trust the sketchy smuggler with the suspiciously convenient ship." Steve made the call in 2 seconds, the same battlefield instinct that had kept him alive through 2 wars. "We go with Rix, but if this is a setup, you'll kill me in creative ways." "Understood." Rix was already moving toward a back exit. "My ship's docked in Bay 94. Follow me and try not to start any more wars on the way." They moved through the cantina's back corridors, emerging into the labyrinthine alleys of Mos Eisley. The city was a maze of adobe structures, market stalls, and suspicious characters lurking in shadows. In the distance, they could hear the mechanical thunder of AT-AT walkers and the screams of civilians caught in the Imperial cordon. Bruce kept pace with the group, but his heart rate was spiking. Every blaster shot, every explosion, every terrified scream pushed him closer to the edge. "This is bad. This is really bad. They're hurting people because of us." "No," Steve said firmly, ducking under a low archway. "They're hurting people because that's what empires do. We've seen it before. Hydra, the Nazis. Tyranny wears different faces, but it's always the same underneath." They rounded a corner and came face to face with a patrol of stormtroopers. For a split second, everyone froze. Then Clint's bow sang and Natasha's pistol barked, and 3 troopers went down before they could raise their weapons. The 4th got a comm transmission out. "Target sighted in Sector 7, requesting..." Before Thor's throne, Mjolnir shattered his helmet and the wall behind him. "So much for stealth," Tony muttered. Bay 94 was chaos incarnate. The hangar was filled with ships of wildly varying designs, sleek pleasure yachts, battered freighters, suspicious-looking vessels with illegal modifications visible even to Tony's untrained eye. Rix led them to a modified YT-1300 light freighter that had seen better decades. Blaster scoring marked its hull, and one of its landing struts was held together with what looked like duct tape's galactic cousin. "Please tell me that thing actually flies," Tony said. "She's got it where it counts," Rix said defensively. "And she's fast enough to outrun those Star Destroyers. Barely." An explosion rocked the hangar entrance as Imperial forces breached the outer doors. AT-STs were pouring through, their cannons already tracking targets. Stormtroopers fanned out in textbook formation, their training evident even if their aim wasn't. "Everyone aboard," Steve ordered. "Thor, buy us some time." The god of thunder grinned, lightning already dancing along his arms. "With pleasure." He planted himself at the base of the boarding ramp and raised Mjolnir high. The hangar's ceiling groaned as storm clouds formed impossibly indoors. Drawn by Asgardian power that defied every law of physics this galaxy knew, lightning exploded in a cascade of white-hot fury, arcing between metal surfaces and frying electronics across the hangar. AT-STs sparked and seized, their systems overloaded. Stormtroopers scattered, their armor conducting enough current to stun but not kill. Thor was pulling his punches, something he rarely did in battle. Inside the ship, alarms were blaring. Rix was in the cockpit running through a pre-flight sequence that should have taken 5 minutes, but he compressed into 30 seconds. "Somebody tell me those engines are ready." "Working on it." Tony had his helmet's interface jacked into the ship's systems, Jarvis already mapping the alien architecture. "Okay, this is actually fascinating. Hyperdrive technology, ion engines, power distribution that's wildly inefficient but functional. I could rebuild this entire ship in a week." "We don't have a week," Natasha snapped from the co-pilot's seat. "We barely have a minute," Clint added, watching through the viewport as more Imperial forces converged on their position. "Cap, we need Thor now." Steve keyed his comm. "Thor, time to go." The Asgardian didn't need to be told twice. He launched himself up the ramp as it was already closing, lightning still crackling across his armor. The ship lurched as Rix punched the engines, and they shot out of the hangar bay with centimeters to spare. Blaster fire chased them into Tatooine's dual sun sky. TIE fighters were scrambling from the Star Destroyer's hangar, their distinctive scream cutting through the engine roar. Rix threw the freighter into a violent roll that had everyone grabbing for support. "Strap in," he shouted. "Breaking atmosphere in 30 seconds, and it's going to get rough." Through the cockpit viewport, they could see the Star Destroyer repositioning, its turbo-laser batteries tracking their escape vector. The ship was impossibly massive up close, a monument to industrial warfare on a scale that made even the helicarrier look quaint. Then they were past it, punching through the atmosphere into the star-studded black of space. More TIE fighters were in pursuit, and the Star Destroyer was already angling to follow. Rix's hands flew over the controls. "Calculating jump to light speed. We've got maybe 30 seconds before those TIEs are in firing range." "Jump to light speed," Bruce repeated. That's not possible. You can't exceed the speed of light, the energy requirements alone." "Welcome to the galaxy, friend," Rix said, and pulled the hyperspace lever. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the Avengers felt the universe fold around them in ways that no human had ever experienced before. They were falling forward through space-time itself, carried by technology that shouldn't exist toward a destination they didn't know. Behind them, on the bridge of the Star Destroyer, Darth Vader stood before the viewport, his respirator marking the only sound in the deathly silence. Captain Thrawn stood at attention, awaiting judgment. "They escaped, Lord Vader," the captain said, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Vader's fist clenched slowly, deliberately. "Then you will find them. Deploy probe droids to every system within 50 parsecs. Contact the Inquisitors and inform the Emperor." He paused, feeling the echoes of power that had no place in the Force. "That something new has entered our galaxy. Hyperspace was nothing like anything the Avengers had experienced." Through the cockpit viewport, reality twisted into a tunnel of streaking blue-white light, beautiful and nauseating in equal measure. The ship thrummed with energy as it rode currents between dimensions, traveling faster than light in ways that made Bruce's scientific mind rebel even as it desperately tried to understand. "This is impossible," he muttered, staring at the streaming lights. The energy required to move mass at this speed would tear apart molecular bonds. The radiation exposure alone should kill us. The time dilation effects would cause paradoxes that clearly don't exist here. Tony finished. His helmet retracted as Jarvis ran analysis after analysis. Which means the physics in this galaxy operate under different fundamental rules. Jarvis is cataloging everything. But we're looking at technology centuries beyond anything on Earth. Not centuries, Rix corrected from the pilot's seat, punching coordinates into the Navy computer. Millennia. Hyperspace travel has been around for over 25,000 years. The Republic used it. The Empire uses it. Every 2-credit smuggler with a hyperdrive uses it. You people really aren't from around here, are you? Steve stood behind the pilot's chairs, his tactical mind already working through their situation. "We need information. Where are we going?" "Ord Mantell," Rix said. Neutral territory mostly. Enough of a criminal element that the Empire doesn't patrol too heavily. Enough infrastructure that we can find supplies, contacts, maybe even someone who can help you figure out how you got here. He glanced back at them, his scarred face thoughtful. Though, I've got to say, I've been around. Seen Wookiees rip battle droids apart barehanded, watched Mandalorians take on platoons single-handedly, once saw a Jedi deflect blaster fire with nothing but a laser sword. But you six, you're something else entirely. Jedi? Natasha's interest sharpened. What's a Jedi? Rix's expression went carefully neutral. Peacekeepers. Guardians of the Old Republic. Warrior monks who use the Force. That's the energy field that binds the galaxy together to enforce justice. At least, that's what they were. The Empire hunted them down almost 20 years ago. Order 66, they called it. Most died. The survivors went into hiding. Genocide, Steve said quietly, his voice hard. And this Empire you keep mentioning, how big are we talking? How big? Rix laughed without humor. Try millions of worlds across the entire galaxy, trillions of citizens. The Imperial Navy has over 25,000 Star Destroyers, those triangle ships you saw. Millions of Stormtroopers, super weapons that can destroy entire planets. He saw their expressions and nodded grimly. Yeah, you picked one hell of a galaxy to crash into. Thor's fingers tightened on Mjolnir's handle. We have faced armies before. The Dark Elves, Thanos' forces. Not like this. Rix interrupted. Not spread across a galaxy. The Empire doesn't just have superior numbers. They have infrastructure, industry, a military machine that's been perfected over thousands of years of warfare. You might be able to take one Star Destroyer, maybe two. But there are thousands more where that came from. And the Emperor. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Isn't someone you want to meet. But there's a rebellion, Clint said. It wasn't a question. There was always a rebellion, people who refused to bow to tyranny no matter the odds. You said the Empire like it's something separate from the people. That means someone's fighting back. Rix's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his scarred features. Yeah. The Rebel Alliance. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and hanging on by their fingernails. But they're fighting. Hit-and-run tactics mostly, stealing Imperial supplies, sabotaging facilities, recruiting where they can. A few months ago, they scored a major victory. Destroyed the Empire's ultimate weapon, a battle station the size of a small moon that could vaporize planets. And the Empire's response? Natasha already knew the answer. She'd studied enough dictatorships to predict the pattern. Crackdowns, purges, public executions to remind everyone who's in charge. Rix checked their hyperspace coordinates. We'll be at Ord Mantell in 4 hours. I suggest you use that time to decide what you're going to do. Because that stunt you pulled on Tatooine? Word's going to spread. The Empire's going to be looking for you. And trust me, when the Empire wants you found, there's nowhere in this galaxy you can hide forever. Tony pulled up a holographic interface from his gauntlet. Jarvis already compiling data from every system the AI had accessed on Tatooine and aboard Rix's ship. Then we don't hide. We gather intelligence, find allies, and figure out how to either get home or... He paused, looking at Steve. Make ourselves useful here while we figure out the exit strategy. Steve's jaw tightened. Every tactical instinct told him to focus on finding a way home, getting his team back to Earth where they were needed. But the images from Tatooine kept playing in his mind. Stormtroopers terrorizing civilians, massive war machines deployed against a city, an entire population living under the boot of military occupation. He'd spent 2 years after the Chitauri invasion working with S.H.I.E.L.D. to prepare Earth for future threats. But he'd also spent those years unable to ignore suffering when he saw it. "We'll make that decision when we know more," he said carefully. "But we're not going to stand by and watch atrocities. Not if we can help." Spoken like someone who's never seen what happens to people who defy the Empire, Rix muttered. But there was something in his voice that suggested he understood the sentiment better than he let on. Bruce had moved to the ship's small common area, trying to center himself through breathing exercises. The transformation on Tatooine had been close, too close. The Hulk responded to threats, to danger, to the need to protect. And this galaxy was drowning in all three. How do we know this rebellion isn't just another faction fighting for power? History's full of resistance movements that turned into the next set of oppressors. Fair question, Rix admitted. But I've dealt with both sides. The Empire rules through fear, executions, torture, enslavement of entire species. The rebels? They're fighting for freedom, for democracy, for the right of worlds to govern themselves. Are they perfect? No. Do some of them commit acts that cross lines? Probably. But intent matters, and the rebels aren't trying to conquer the galaxy. They're trying to free it. Thor nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Like your American Revolution, Captain. Your people fought against an empire that sought to rule without consent. You were outnumbered, outgunned, facing the greatest military force of your age. Yet you prevailed because your cause was just. And because we had help, Steve said. France, Spain, volunteers from across Europe who believed in what we were fighting for. He looked around at his team, seeing the same question in all their eyes. What do we do? We need to meet this rebellion, hear their side, understand what we're dealing with before we make any commitments. That can be arranged, Rix said. I know people. Smugglers who run supplies to rebel cells, information brokers who know where the Alliance operates. It won't be cheap and it won't be safe, but... Alarms shrieked through the ship. Rix swore and yanked the hyperspace lever, and reality snapped back into normal space with a lurch that sent everyone stumbling. Through the viewport, they could see why. 3 Star Destroyers had formed a blockade across their route. TIE fighters already launching in attack formations. How did they know our route? Natasha demanded, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. They didn't, Rix said, his hands flying over the controls as he threw the ship into evasive maneuvers. This is an Imperial checkpoint. They've been setting them up all over the sector since the Death Star was destroyed. Random searches, looking for rebel sympathizers. Green laser fire from TIE fighters stitched across space around them, and we just jumped right into one. Tony's faceplate snapped down. Jarvis, I need targeting solutions on those fighters. How do I get outside? Sir, we're in hard vacuum. Even your armor has limits. So do TIE fighters. Find me a way out. Rix pointed to the ship's gun turrets. Quad laser cannons, upper and lower. They're manual operation, but... I'll take upper, Clint said, already moving toward the ladder. If I can shoot aliens, I can shoot space planes. I'll take lower. Natasha followed, her expression grim and focused. More TIE fighters were closing in, 6 of them now in attack formation. Their laser cannons fired in precise sequences, their pilots executing textbook maneuvers. One blast clipped the freighter's shields, and the ship bucked violently. Shields at 60%, Rix reported. These Imperial pilots are better trained than the ones on Tatooine. We can't take much more of this. Thor stood and hefted Mjolnir. Then we do not take more. I will deal with these craft myself. Thor, wait. Steve started, but the Asgardian was already moving toward the airlock. You can't survive in space. I am a god, Captain, Thor said calmly. I have walked the void between realms, stood in the heart of dying stars. This is merely vacuum. He pulled open the airlock's inner door. Bruce grabbed his arm. Even you need to breathe. You'll have seconds before. Then I shall make those seconds count. Thor's eyes blazed with lightning. Trust me, my friends. I did not survive Ragnarok to die in the emptiness of space. He stepped into the airlock, sealed the inner door, and opened the outer hatch. The void claimed him immediately, but Thor was already moving, Mjolnir spinning in his grip as he propelled himself toward the nearest TIE fighter. The pilot saw him coming, impossible not to when your target was wreathed in lightning and flying through hard vacuum without a ship, and tried to evade. But TIE fighters were built for speed and maneuverability in space, not for fighting enemies that moved like guided missiles. Thor struck the cockpit viewport with Mjolnir, and the transparent steel shattered. Explosive decompression tore through the fighter, and it spiraled out of control. Thor was already moving to the next target, lightning arcing from his body to the fighter's hull, overloading its systems. The pilot ejected as his craft exploded. From the ship's upper turret, Clint watched in amazement. Okay, that's officially the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I watched Tony fly a nuke through a wormhole. Focus, Barton. Natasha's voice crackled through the comms from the lower turret. We've got 4 more fighters, and Thor can't hold his breath forever. Clint swung the quad lasers toward an approaching TIE, leading it by instinct rather than training. His first burst went wide. These weapons had different recoil patterns than anything he'd used. But his second caught the fighter's solar panel wing. The craft went into a flat spin, emergency lights flashing as it tumbled away. Natasha's gunnery was more precise, her assassin's patience translating well to the controlled environment of the turret. She fired in short, measured bursts, conserving energy while maximizing accuracy. A TIE fighter drifted into her crosshairs, and she squeezed the trigger. The quad lasers punched through its hull in 4 places simultaneously, and the fighter came apart in a silent explosion of metal and fire. Thor tumbled back through space, his face blue from oxygen deprivation, but his grip on Mjolnir still strong. He struck one final fighter on his return trajectory, denting its hull with the impact, before arrowing back toward the freighter's open airlock. Steve was waiting at the inner door as Thor stumbled through, gasping for air. Never doing that. Again, the Asgardian wheezed. It worked, Steve said, helping him to a seat. Insane, but it worked. 2 fighters left, Tony reported, tracking them on his HUD. And the Star Destroyers are launching more. Rix, we need to jump now. Working on it. The smuggler's fingers danced over the Navy computer, calculating coordinates while simultaneously piloting through a laser firestorm. Hyperspace takes time to calculate if you don't want to fly through a star or... The ship lurched violently as turbo laser fire from one of the Star Destroyers grazed their shields. Warning klaxons blared, and the lights flickered. Shields at 20%, Rix shouted. 1 more hit like that, and we're done. Tony made a decision. Jarvis, can you interface with this ship's computer? Already integrated, sir. The architecture is surprisingly straightforward once you understand the basic. Calculate hyperspace coordinates for anywhere that's not here. Override their safety protocols if you have to. Sir, that's extremely dangerous. Without proper astrogation, we'll be debris if we stay here. Do it." Jarvis complied, and the Navy computer lit up with coordinates calculated faster than any organic pilot could manage. Rix stared at the solution, then at Tony. "You just did the impossible. These calculations should take minutes, and your AI did them in seconds. Perks of having the most advanced artificial intelligence Earth ever built," Tony said. "Now punch it before we become target practice." Rix pulled the hyperspace lever, and the stars stretched into lines once more. Behind them, the Star Destroyer's turbo lasers fired into empty space, and Admiral Toth stood on the bridge, his jaw tight with frustration. "They escaped," his communications officer reported unnecessarily. "Track their vector," Toth ordered, "and relay all data to Lord Vader's flagship. He wants these intruders found, and I will not be the admiral who failed him twice." On his command ship, light years away, Darth Vader received the report. He stood in his meditation chamber, the dark side of the Force swirling around him as he reached out across the stars, searching for the strange warriors who fought without the Force, yet wielded power that resonated through the galaxy like ripples on a pond. They were something new, something unpredicted. And in the Emperor's grand design, unpredictable elements were the most dangerous of all. "Increase patrols in all outer rim sectors," he commanded through the comm. "Deploy Inquisitors to Tatooine. I want every resource at our disposal searching for these warriors. And prepare my shuttle. I will oversee this hunt personally." Ord Mantell was a world of controlled chaos. The planet's surface was a patchwork of industrial zones, criminal hideouts, and settlements that existed in the gray areas between imperial law and outright anarchy. Rix brought the freighter down at a private landing pad on the outskirts of Worldport, the planet's largest city, where the local authorities asked fewer questions and accepted bribes more readily. "Welcome to the armpit of the Outer Rim," Rix said as the boarding ramp lowered. Humid air rushed in, carrying the smell of machinery, ozone, and something organic that might have been food or garbage. It was hard to tell. "Keep your weapons close. Don't make eye contact with anyone in Imperial uniform, and for the love of the Force, don't start any fights." Tony's scanners swept the spaceport, cataloging dozens of species he'd never seen and technology that ranged from cutting edge to held together with literal wire and hope. "Jarvis, you getting all this?" "Indeed, sir. I'm detecting energy signatures consistent with weapons, surveillance equipment, and several devices whose purpose I cannot immediately identify. This location appears to be what you would call a hive of scum and villainy." "Did you just quote Star Wars at me?" Tony asked. "I thought the cultural reference appropriate, sir." Steve descended the ramp with his shield on his back, his enhanced senses on high alert. Every instinct honed through decades of combat told him this was hostile territory. "Rix, these contacts of yours, how reliable are they?" "Depends on your definition of reliable," Rix said, leading them through the maze of landing pads toward the city proper. "Jack Saz is an information broker, deals in secrets, connections, and the occasional weapons shipment. He's expensive, morally flexible, and absolutely will sell us out to the Empire if the price is right. But he's also smart enough to know that you six are worth more as clients than as bounties, at least for now." "Comforting," Natasha muttered, her hand near her pistol as they passed a group of Trandoshans who watched them with predatory interest. The city was a vertical maze of platforms, bridges, and structures that defied architectural logic. Neon signs advertised services in dozens of languages, some recognizable as variations of trade, others utterly alien. Speeders zipped through the air lanes overhead, while beings of every description crowded the streets. Humans, aliens, droids navigating through the press of bodies. Bruce stayed close to the group, his heart rate elevated but controlled. This is a lot. All these people, all this noise. If I lose it here, you won't, Steve said firmly. We've got your back, Bruce. Just breathe. They entered a cantina that made the one on Tatooine look upscale. The lighting was dim, the clientele dangerous, and the music was some kind of atonal electronica that set Tony's teeth on edge. Rix led them to a private booth in the back, where a Quarren sat surrounded by datapads and holographic displays. Jack Saz's facial tentacles writhed as he studied the newcomers. His eyes, all four of them, assessed each Avenger with the calculating gaze of someone who made his living reading people. Rix, you bring interesting company and expensive problems, from what I hear. Word travels fast, Rix said, sliding into the booth. When you destroy Imperial property on Tatooine and shoot down TIE fighters with hammers and lightning, word doesn't travel, it sprints. Jack's tentacles gestured to the datapads. Imperial bounties were posted within an hour, dead or alive. 50,000 credits each. That's more than most systems see in a year. Clint whistled low. We made an impression. You made the Empire's most wanted list, Jack corrected, and you did it in less than a day. Congratulations. That's usually reserved for Jedi survivors and high-ranking rebel operatives. One tentacle tapped a datapad, bringing up holographic images of each Avenger captured by Imperial surveillance. They don't even know what to call you. Unknown combatants with advanced technology and unconventional weapons. The Empire hates not knowing things. Tony leaned forward, his faceplate retracted. Then let's give them something to know. We need information. What's the Empire's force distribution in this sector? What are the Rebellion's operational areas? And most importantly, he fixed Jack with a hard stare. Who in this galaxy knows enough about dimensional physics to help us get home? Jack's tentacles stilled. Dimensional physics? You're saying you're not from this galaxy? We're saying we need help, Steve interjected smoothly. And we can pay. Assuming your currency system accepts. He glanced at Tony. Jarvis already hacked their banking system and created us several accounts using Imperial credits we borrowed from Tatooine's garrison payroll, Tony said casually. We're well funded. Jack's expression, difficult to read on a Quarren face, suggested something between impressed and alarmed. You stole from the Empire and hacked our banking system in less than a day. I'm starting to understand why they want you so badly. He pulled up new data on his displays. Dimensional travel is theoretical at best. The Jedi had some force techniques related to space-time manipulation, but most of that knowledge was lost when the Order fell. Your best bet would be someone with access to ancient Jedi or Sith holocrons, force-powered data storage devices that contain knowledge from dead Force users. And where would we find these holocrons? Natasha asked. That's where things get complicated, Jack said. The Empire seized most of them during the Purge. They're stored in high-security vaults on Coruscant, the Imperial capital, or aboard the personal collections of Sith lords. He paused meaningfully. There's one other option. The Rebel Alliance has been collecting Jedi artifacts when they can, trying to preserve what's left of the Order's legacy. If anyone outside the Empire has access to holocrons, it would be them. Thor's eyes narrowed. Then we must seek out this rebellion, not only to aid our return home, but to understand the war that has consumed this galaxy. Noble sentiment, Jack said. Suicidal, but noble. The rebellion doesn't exactly publish their recruiting offices. They're paranoid about Imperial infiltration, and for good reason. Half the rebel cells the Empire claims to uncover are fake ones they created themselves to draw out real sympathizers. But you know how to contact them, Rick said. It wasn't a question. Jack's tentacles writhed in what might have been amusement or anxiety. I know someone who knows someone. But putting you in contact with the Alliance? That's dangerous business. The kind that gets information brokers like me disappeared into Imperial detention centers. Tony pulled out a small device he'd been working on during the hyperspace journey. A modified arc reactor component that pulsed with blue light. How about this as payment? Miniaturized fusion reactor. Clean energy, portable, powerful enough to run a small city. Jarvis can provide the specifications. Jack stared at the device, his tentacles quivering. That's not possible. Fusion at that scale requires technology your galaxy apparently hasn't developed yet. Tony finished. We've got plenty more where that came from. So, do we have a deal? Before Jack could answer, the cantina doors exploded inward. Stormtroopers poured through the entrance, their white armor stark against the dim interior. But these weren't regular troops. Their armor had red markings, and their weapons were more sophisticated. An officer in a black uniform followed them, flanked by two figures in dark robes that seemed to drink in the light. Imperial Inquisitors, Rix hissed. Force sensitive. They hunt Jedi survivors. The Inquisitors' helmets swiveled, scanning the crowd. One of them, a tall humanoid with pale skin visible beneath his hood, pointed directly at the Avengers booth. There, I sense something. Not the Force, but power nonetheless. Steve was already moving, shield coming off his back as the stormtroopers raised their weapons. Avengers, defensive positions. The cantina erupted into chaos. Civilians scrambled for exits as blaster fire lit up the dim space. Steve's shield deflected a volley meant for Natasha, who rolled behind the bar and returned fire with precision shots that dropped two troopers. Clint's arrows found gaps in armor plating that shouldn't have been visible in the poor lighting. But his enhanced eyesight and decades of experience made the impossible routine. Thor summoned lightning with a thought, and electricity arced across the cantina, grounding itself in stormtrooper armor and leaving them twitching on the floor. The Inquisitors moved with inhuman speed, their lightsabers igniting, spinning red blades that hummed with deadly energy. Tony engaged his repulsors and shot toward the ceiling, drawing fire away from his teammates. Jarvis, analysis on those laser swords. Plasma contained in a magnetic field, sir. Temperature approximately 20,000 degrees Celsius. They appear to be able to deflect energy weapons. Good thing I've got kinetic options too. Tony fired a micro-missile from his shoulder mount. The Inquisitor's lightsaber came up, deflecting it. But the explosion still sent him staggering. Bruce felt the Hulk surging forward, responding to the threat, the violence, the need to protect his team. He tried to breathe through it, to maintain control. But a stormtrooper's blaster bolt seared past his head, and instinct took over. The transformation was instant. Bruce Banner disappeared, and the Hulk erupted into existence with a roar that shook the cantina's foundations. He was massive, green, and absolutely furious. A stormtrooper had the poor judgment to shoot him in the chest. The blaster bolt scorched his skin but didn't penetrate, and the Hulk responded by grabbing the trooper and throwing him through two walls. Hulk smashed space Nazis, he bellowed and charged into the fray. The second Inquisitor, a Twi'lek female with scarred leku, moved to intercept the Hulk, her lightsaber held in a defensive stance. She was fast, force-enhanced reflexes, letting her dodge the Hulk's first massive fist. Her lightsaber came around in a strike that would have bisected a normal opponent. It skidded across the Hulk's forearm, cutting deep but not severing. The Hulk roared in pain and rage, his regeneration already closing the wound. He backhanded her with enough force to send her crashing through the bar, bottles of alien alcohol exploding around her. Steve engaged the first Inquisitor in close combat, his shield meeting the lightsaber in a clash of vibranium and plasma. The Inquisitor's eyes widened behind his helmet as the shield not only blocked the lightsaber, but showed no signs of damage. What manner of metal? The Inquisitor started, then had to dodge as Steve followed up with a shield bash that would have shattered his sternum. They fought in close quarters, the Inquisitor's lightsaber spinning in the traditional Inquisitor style, a weapon designed to intimidate and overwhelm. But Steve had fought Chitauri, Ultron's drones, and Thanos' army. A spinning laser sword, while impressive, was just another weapon that could be countered with technique and timing. He caught the lightsaber on his shield, forcing it wide, and delivered a devastating punch to the Inquisitor's kidney. The man doubled over, and Steve's knee came up to meet his descending face. The Inquisitor stumbled back, blood streaming from his broken nose. "Impossible," the Inquisitor gasped. "You have no connection to the Force. You're just a man." "I'm a soldier," Steve said coldly, "and I've been fighting bullies like your Empire since before you were born." Natasha and Clint had formed a two-person kill zone near the entrance, their weapons complementing each other perfectly. Any Stormtrooper who tried to enter found themselves either shot or pinned to walls with arrows. The few who made it through found the Hulk waiting, and none of them made it far after that. Tony was engaging both Inquisitors now, using his superior mobility to keep them off balance. His repulsors could keep the lightsabers at bay, and his micro-missiles forced them to choose between defending and attacking. "These guys are good," he admitted over the comms. "But they're trained to fight Force users, not powered armor." Thor landed beside the Twi'lek Inquisitor as she climbed from the wreckage of the bar, his eyes crackling with power. "You wield lightning," she said, confusion and fear mixing in her voice. "But you are not of the dark side. What are you?" "I am Thor, son of Odin," he said, and brought Mjolnir down. She raised her lightsaber to block, and the weapons met with a thunderous crack. The lightsaber held for a moment. Then the magnetic containment failed under the force of an Asgardian god's blow. The blade sputtered and died, and the Inquisitor found herself holding a useless hilt. Thor's follow-up strike was measured but devastating. Mjolnir caught her in the chest, cracking ribs and sending her flying across the cantina to land in an unconscious heap. The male Inquisitor, seeing his partner fall and his stormtroopers decimated, made a tactical decision. He threw a thermal detonator, not at the Avengers, but at the cantina's support structure. The explosion brought down part of the ceiling, creating a barrier of debris and flames. When the dust cleared, the remaining Imperials were gone, retreating into the city. But their message was clear. The Empire knew where the Avengers were, and reinforcements would be coming. Jack Saz emerged from under his table, tentacles trembling. "You just fought off Inquisitors, defeated them. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "We've fought worse," Clint said, retrieving arrows from fallen stormtroopers. "Not in this galaxy, you haven't," Jack said. He looked at Rix, then at the Avengers, and made a decision. "You want to contact the rebellion? Fine, I'll arrange it. Because if you can do that..." He gestured at the unconscious Inquisitor and the destroyed cantina. "Then maybe, just maybe, the Alliance actually has a chance. Steve helped Bruce, human again, naked and embarrassed, wrapped in someone's cloak, to his feet. Set up the meeting. We need allies, and we need them fast. Outside, in the streets of Worldport, Imperial communications officers were already transmitting reports to the nearest Star Destroyer. Darth Vader received the update within minutes, his respirator marking steady rhythm as he absorbed the information. 6 warriors, 2 Inquisitors defeated, an entire platoon of Stormtroopers eliminated, conventional weapons that bypassed lightsaber defense, physical strength that matched or exceeded Force enhancement. They are not Force users, Vader said to Admiral Piet, who stood nervously nearby. Yet they wield power that rivals it. This cannot be coincidence. My lord, should we deploy additional forces to Ord Mantell? No. Vader turned from the viewport, his cape swirling. Let them contact the rebellion. Let them believe they've found allies. And when they lead us to the Alliance's leadership, his fist clenched slowly, we will destroy them all together. The rebel contact arrived 3 days later in the form of a Duras pilot named Shriv Surgav, who flew a battered A-Wing interceptor and had the cocky attitude of someone who'd survived more suicide missions than he could count. He found the Avengers in a warehouse safe house on Ord Mantell's industrial outskirts, where they'd been laying low and learning everything they could about the galaxy they'd fallen into. So, you're the ones making the Empire lose sleep, Shriv said, his red eyes scanning each Avenger with professional assessment. Gotta say, I expected you to be taller. Well, except for the big green guy. He's adequately tall. The Hulk, currently Bruce Banner again and wearing clothes Rix had procured, managed a tired smile. He comes and goes. Yeah, Jack mentioned that. Also mentioned you can shoot lightning from your hands, deflect blaster fire with a shield that shouldn't exist, and fly around in personal armor that makes our best starfighters look like training drones. Shriv crossed his arms. I'm here to verify you're not an Imperial trap before I take you anywhere near Alliance leadership. So convince me. Tony had been working on a project in the corner, a modified communicator that Jarvis was integrating with the local holonet. He didn't look up. How do we prove we're not Imperial? Show you our Earth passports? Give you a DNA sample that won't match anything in your genetic databases? Sing the Star-Spangled Banner? How about you tell me why you want to help the rebellion? Shriv countered. Because from where I'm standing, you've got no stake in this war. You're not citizens of the Empire. You've got technology that could make you rich anywhere in the galaxy. So why throw in with a bunch of desperate freedom fighters who'll probably get you killed? Steve had been expecting this question. He'd been asking it himself for 3 days, weighing their responsibility to get home against the reality of what they'd seen. Because we've seen what happens when good people do nothing. We've watched empires rise on Earth, seen tyranny spread when it isn't opposed. The empire you're fighting? We've fought versions of it before. Hydra, the Nazis, different names, same rot underneath. Pretty words, Shriv said. But the Alliance doesn't run on idealism. We run on results, on people willing to die for something bigger than themselves. Then let me show you results, Natasha said, pulling up a datapad they'd stolen from the Imperial forces on Ord Mantell. While we've been waiting, we've been busy. Jarvis hacked into the local Imperial network and downloaded their patrol routes, supply manifests, and personnel files for this entire sector. 3 Star Destroyer positions, 6 garrison locations, and the complete security protocols for an Imperial depot on Naboo that's storing weapons meant for a new offensive in the Outer Rim. Shriv's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. This is real-time Imperial intelligence. Do Do you know what the Alliance could do with this? That's why we're giving it to you, Steve said. Not as payment, not as leverage, but because it's the right thing to do. Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir resting against his shoulder. In my realm, we have a saying. Heroes are made by the paths they choose, not the powers they are graced with. We did not choose to come to your galaxy, but we choose now to stand against the darkness that threatens it. Shreve studied them for a long moment, then keyed his comm. General Syndulla, this is Starbird. The assets are legitimate. Recommend immediate extraction for operational briefing. Copy that, Starbird, a woman's voice replied through the comm. Bringing the Ghost in now. A ship shimmered into view outside the warehouse, literally materialized as some kind of cloaking device deactivated. It was a VCX-100 light freighter, sleek and well-maintained, despite obvious signs of combat damage. The boarding ramp lowered, and a Twi'lek woman descended, her green skin marked with patterns that suggested both beauty and hard-won experience. She wore pilot's gear and carried a blaster with the casual confidence of someone who'd used it too many times to count. I'm Hera Syndulla, she said, her accented voice carrying authority that had nothing to do with volume. General in the Rebel Alliance and Captain of the Ghost. I've been authorized to bring you to our operational base for a formal meeting with Alliance Command. Her eyes traveled across each Avenger, lingering on Thor's hammer and Tony's armor. I'll be honest, I've seen a lot in this war. Jedi survivors, Force-sensitive children, warriors from 100 worlds. But you six, you're something entirely new. We get that a lot, Clint said. Harris smiled slightly. Then you'll understand why Alliance Intelligence wants to verify everything about you before we commit resources. No offense intended, but we've lost too many people to Imperial infiltration to take anything on faith. None taken, Steve said. We'd do the same in your position. Where's this base? That information stays classified until we're in hyperspace, and I'm certain you're not broadcasting our position to the nearest Star Destroyer. Hera gestured to her ship. Bring whatever gear you need. The flight will take several hours. They boarded the Ghost with Rix, who'd proven himself useful enough that Steve had invited him to join them. The ship's interior was worn but functional, every surface showing the patina of years in service. A Lasat, a massive purple-furred warrior with a bow rifle, watched them with suspicious eyes from the common area. Zeb, our guests, Hera said. Avengers, this is Garazeb Aurelios. He'll be watching you during the flight. Just in case. In case we're secret Imperial agents? Tony asked, examining the ship's systems with professional interest. Because I've got to say, our cover story's pretty elaborate. Dimensional travel, alien technology, the whole 9 yards. In case you're dangerous, Zeb rumbled, which you clearly are. The Ghost lifted off smoothly, Hera's piloting skills evident in every adjustment. They climbed through Ord Mantell's atmosphere and into space, where a small rebel escort, 2 X-Wings and a Y-Wing bomber, fell into formation around them. Phoenix Squadron, this is Ghost, Hera transmitted. Package secure, jumping to hyperspace on my mark. The stars stretched into lines, and they were away. During the flight, Hera briefed them on the rebellion's current situation. It was grim reading. The Alliance was outnumbered thousands to 1, outgunned, and barely holding territory across a dozen sectors. The Death Star's destruction had been a massive propaganda victory. But the Empire's response had been brutal. Entire worlds had been subjugated, their populations enslaved or executed as examples. We're winning the moral war, Hera said, bringing up holographic displays of battle sites and Imperial atrocities. But morality doesn't stop turbo-laser bombardments. We need ships, weapons, trained personnel, and we need them faster than we can acquire them through normal channels. Bruce studied the casualty reports, his expression growing darker. These numbers. The Empire killed 3 million people on Jeddah, just as a demonstration. That was before they had the Death Star fully operational, Hera said quietly. When they tested it, they used Alderaan, an entire planet. 2 billion people, gone in seconds. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the Avengers, who'd faced Thanos and watched half the universe turn to dust, found themselves confronted by the scale of destruction the Empire could inflict. We stopped Thanos, Steve said finally. We brought everyone back. But here, he looked at the star maps showing Imperial-controlled space. Here, we're just 6 people against an empire that controls a galaxy. What can we really accomplish? You already accomplished something, a new voice said. A hologram flickered to life in the common area, showing a woman in white robes with hair styled in elaborate loops. She was young but carried herself with regal bearing. You survived an encounter with Darth Vader's Inquisitors and lived to tell about it. That alone makes you valuable to the Alliance. Princess Leia Organa, Hera said formally, leader of the Rebel Alliance. Leia's hologram studied them with keen intelligence. General Syndulla has transmitted your intelligence package. Our analysts confirm it's genuine and extremely valuable. You've given us operational data that will save lives and disrupt Imperial operations for months. She paused. But I need to know your intentions. Are you looking for a way home? Are you mercenaries seeking payment? Or are you willing to fight? Tony stepped forward. We're looking for all of the above, Princess. We want to get home. That's non-negotiable. But while we're here, we're not going to stand by and watch genocide. We've got skills, technology, and a track record of making impossible odds look easy. Use us. The Empire has placed substantial bounties on your heads, Leia said. 50,000 credits each, dead or alive. They want you badly, which suggests you frighten them. That's unprecedented. The Empire doesn't frighten easily. Then let's give them something to be really scared of, Natasha said. You mentioned an Imperial depot on Naboo. What if we hit it? Hard, fast, and in a way that makes the Empire question every security protocol they have. Leia's expression shifted, calculation replacing caution. You'd be willing to conduct offensive operations against Imperial targets? Lady, where we come from, we threw hands with a purple alien who could snap his fingers and kill half the universe, Clint said. Your empire's scary, but we've faced worse. Then we have much to discuss, Leia said. General Syndulla, bring them to Base Omega. It's time the Alliance had some good news for a change. The hologram flickered out. Hera's hands tightened on the controls, and for the first time since they'd met her, she smiled. A genuine expression of hope. Welcome to the rebellion. Try not to get us all killed on your first mission. They dropped out of hyperspace near a moon that orbital mechanics said shouldn't exist. Its orbit was all wrong, its gravitational signature barely registered. But as they approached, Tony's sensors picked up the truth. It was camouflaged, wrapped in technology that bent light and masked its presence. That's incredible, he breathed. A cloaked moon, the power requirements alone. Are why the Empire hasn't found us yet, Hera said. Base Omega is our main operations center in this sector. 2,000 personnel, repair facilities, intelligence operations. Everything we need to coordinate the fight. The Ghost passed through the cloaking field, and suddenly the moon was real, visible and solid, its surface dotted with landing pads and defensive emplacements. And as of today, it's your home base too. They landed in a hangar bay that buzzed with activity. Rebel technicians worked on X-wings and Y-wings, droids trundled past carrying supplies, and soldiers in orange flight suits moved with the purposeful energy of people fighting a war. Every face turned as the Avengers descended the Ghost's ramp. Curiosity and hope mixing in equal measure. A man in a general's uniform approached. Older, weathered, with the bearing of a career military officer who'd seen too much combat. Captain Rogers? I'm General David Straven, Alliance Intelligence. We need to debrief you immediately. About what? Steve asked. About everything, Draven said. Your technology, your capabilities, your origins, and most importantly, about how we're going to use you to hurt the Empire so badly they'll regret ever putting a bounty on your heads. In the briefing room, an hour later, surrounded by Rebel command staff, the Avengers found themselves looking at holographic displays of Imperial installations across a dozen systems. Draven pointed to one, the weapons depot on Naboo that Natasha had mentioned. This facility stores enough weapons to equip 50 battalions, Draven said. Blaster rifles, thermal detonators, heavy repeating cannons, everything the Empire needs for their next offensive in the mid-rim. Intelligence suggests they're moving the shipment in 3 days. If we can destroy that depot, we'll cripple Imperial operations in 6 sectors. What's the security like? Clint asked. 200 stormtroopers, automated defense turrets, ray shields, and an Imperial garrison within 20 kilometers that can respond in minutes, Draven said. It's a fortress, which is why we've never attempted a direct assault. Tony studied the schematics. Jarvis already running attack simulations. What if you had someone who could get inside the shields? Someone who could disable the automated defenses from within? We'd have a chance, Draven admitted. But penetrating those defenses would require a guy in an Iron Man suit with an AI that can hack any computer system in your galaxy? Tony finished. Because I'm looking at their security, and honestly, it's insulting how easy this is going to be. Hera leaned forward. You're saying you could do this? 6 of you against a fortified Imperial depot? Thor's smile was fierce and full of thunder. General, we once defended New York City against an alien invasion with less preparation and worse odds. A warehouse full of weapons and a few hundred soldiers? He hefted Mjolnir. That is merely Tuesday for the Avengers. Steve looked around at his team. Tony confident and calculating, Natasha cold and ready. Clint checking his arrows, Thor eager for battle. Bruce nervous but determined. They were far from home, stranded in a galaxy at war, facing an enemy that spanned countless worlds. But they were still the Avengers, and they'd never back down from a fight that mattered. We'll do it, Steve said. Give us the mission parameters, the enemy positions, and extraction protocols. We'll show the Empire that Earth's mightiest heroes aren't someone you want to make an enemy of. Draven nodded slowly, then extended his hand. Welcome to the rebellion, Captain. May the Force be with you. Steve shook it firmly. We'll make our own luck, General. We always do. Naboo was beautiful in a way that made the coming violence feel like sacrilege. The planet's surface was a tapestry of rolling grasslands, crystalline lakes, and cities that blended organic architecture with technological sophistication. The Avengers approached in a stolen Imperial shuttle, courtesy of Tony hacking a garrison's hangar bay on Ord Mantell. their transponder codes perfectly forged by Jarvis. Imperial Shuttle ST-321, you are cleared for landing at Depot RX-7. The traffic controller's voice crackled through the comm. Transmit your cargo manifest and prepare for standard inspection. Tony, disguised in a stolen Imperial officer's uniform that Jarvis had perfectly tailored to regulation standards, responded with practiced boredom. Copy that, Control. Transmitting now. We've got replacement power cells and ration packs. Routine supply run. The controller barely glanced at the manifest. Jarvis had made sure every detail was perfect, down to the requisition officer's digital signature. Acknowledged. Proceed to landing pad 3. Welcome to Naboo, Lieutenant. They set down in the depot's exterior landing zone, surrounded by prefabricated Imperial structures that looked identical to every other garrison across the galaxy. Gray, utilitarian, designed for function over form. Through the shuttle's viewport, they could see stormtroopers on patrol, automated defense turrets tracking movement, and the massive warehouse structures that held enough weapons to fuel a sector-wide campaign. Phase 1 complete, Steve said, checking his shield one final time. It was disguised under a tarp in the cargo hold, along with Mjolnir, Clint's bow, and the rest of their distinctive equipment. Natasha, Clint, you're up. Natasha and Clint descended the ramp first, dressed as Imperial crewmen with forged ID badges that would pass cursory inspection. Their body language was perfect, bored, tired, just 2 more cogs in the Empire's vast machine. A Stormtrooper sergeant approached, datapad in hand. Cargo inspection, he said flatly. Standard procedure. Of course, Natasha replied in accented basic, letting her natural Russian inflection color the words just enough to sound like she was from some distant Imperial world. Though I must warn you, some of the power cells are leaking coolant. Maintenance said it was within acceptable parameters, but she shrugged. I wouldn't want to be the one explaining to command why their inspectors got chemical burns. The sergeant hesitated. Chemical burns meant paperwork. Paperwork meant staying late. And this was clearly a routine supply run from a properly coded Imperial shuttle. Right, I'll flag it for the quartermaster. Unload your cargo at Warehouse 7 and get your departure clearance from the command center. Understood, Sergeant. Natasha snapped off a crisp salute that was exactly regulation, and the Stormtrooper waved them through. As the sergeant walked away, Clint muttered under his breath, I can't believe that worked. Never underestimate the power of bureaucratic laziness, Natasha replied. They moved the cargo toward Warehouse 7. In reality, the other Avengers hidden under tarps alongside their weapons. Once inside the massive structure, surrounded by crates of blaster rifles and racks of thermal detonators, Steve threw off his covering and stood, shield already on his arm. We're in. Jarvis, you have access to their systems? Tony's voice came through their earpieces. They'd spent the last 3 days fabricating communicators that worked with local frequencies. Already inside their network, their security is a joke. No encryption worth mentioning, authentication protocols that a first-year MIT student could crack. I'm mapping guard positions now. A holographic display materialized from Tony's gauntlet, showing a real-time layout of the depot. Red dots marked stormtroopers, 20 inside the warehouse, another 50 scattered across the facility. Blue dots showed automated defense turrets. Yellow marked the command center where officers coordinated security. We've got a 20-minute window before the next automated security sweep, Tony said, emerging from cover in full armor, his faceplate down. After that, their system will flag any discrepancies. We need to move fast. Standard breach protocol, Steve said. falling into the tactical mindset that had served him through countless missions. Thor, Hulk, you draw attention and engage the main forces. Natasha, Clint, take out communications and prevent reinforcements from calling for backup. Tony, disable the automated defenses and weapon systems. I'll secure the command center and any intelligence we can extract. Bruce was already feeling the familiar tension, the Hulk pressing against his consciousness like a caged animal sensing freedom. Just say when, Cap. Now. Bruce let go, and the transformation rippled through him. Skin turned green, muscles expanded, and the Hulk erupted with a roar that echoed through the warehouse like thunder. He grabbed a crate of blaster rifles, easily 3 tons of weapons and packaging, and hurled it through the warehouse wall. The Durasteel buckled and tore, alarms immediately shrieking across the facility. "Hulk smash Empire!" he bellowed, charging through the hole he'd created. Stormtroopers scrambled, bringing weapons to bear, but the Hulk was already among them. He backhanded one trooper into 3 others, grabbed a 5th by the leg, and used him as a club to clear a 6-meter radius. Blaster fire stitched across his chest and arms, burning his skin, making him angrier and stronger with each hit. Thor launched into the air, Mjolnir spinning as he called down lightning from Naboo's clear sky. Storm clouds formed impossibly fast, Asgardian power overriding local weather patterns, and thunder crashed across the depot. Lightning arced between structures, frying automated turrets and causing power fluctuations that had technicians running in panic. "For Asgard!" Thor's voice boomed across the facility as he struck down at a cluster of stormtroopers. The impact cratered the Duracrete, sending troops flying. His hammer returned to his hand, and he was already moving to the next target, a whirlwind of divine fury. In the command center, Imperial officers watched their security feeds with growing horror. "What are they?" the depot commander, Colonel Brask, demanded. "What in the Emperor's name are those things?" "Unknown, sir," a technician reported, his hands flying over controls. "They're not in any database. One appears to be a massive humanoid with incredible strength. The other is generating atmospheric electrical discharges at will." "I don't care what they are," Brask snapped. "Sound the alarm. Contact the garrison. Deploy all available." The blast door to the command center exploded inward. Steve Rogers stood in the smoking doorway, shield raised, his uniform somehow still pristine despite the chaos outside. Behind him, 3 stormtroopers lay unconscious, their armor dented from shield strikes delivered with surgical precision. "Colonel Brask," Steve said calmly, stepping into the room. "I'm Captain America, and you're relieved of command." Brask drew his blaster pistol. Steve's shield flew from his hand, ricocheted off 2 walls, struck the pistol hard enough to shatter it, and returned to his arm in one fluid motion. The officers stared in shock at the destroyed weapon, then at the calm, blue-eyed soldier who just demonstrated physics that shouldn't be possible. "Your security protocols," Steve said. "How do you call for reinforcements?" "I'll never..." Brask started. Steve was across the room in 3 strides. His hand clamped on Brask's wrist with strength that had nothing to do with super soldier enhancements, and everything to do with a man who'd fought through wars and wouldn't tolerate tyranny. "I wasn't asking permission. Jarvis?" "Accessing local communication systems now, Captain." The AI's voice responded through the command center's speakers, which caused another round of shocked stares. "Reinforcement protocols are primitive. I'm looping their distress call to create the impression of technical difficulties. The garrison believes they're experiencing standard comm interference." On the warehouse's roof, Natasha and Clint had positioned themselves with overlapping fields of fire. Clint's bow sang as arrow after arrow found targets, stormtroopers trying to organize a defense, officers attempting to reach communication stations, technicians fleeing toward speeders. He wasn't killing when he didn't have to. Explosive arrows for equipment, blunt tips for personnel, precise shots that disabled rather than destroyed. Natasha worked with her pistols, but her real value was tactical coordination. Tony, 3 turrets still active on the eastern perimeter. Thor's in their firing solution. On it. Tony streaked across the depot, his armor's sensors highlighting the automated weapons. He'd spent the last 3 days studying Imperial technology, and these turrets were laughably simple, targeting computers that processed slower than Jarvis's boot sequence, power supplies that were criminally exposed. His repulsors fired in precise bursts, melting circuitry and fusing mechanical components. The turrets sparked and died. The Hulk was in his element, wading through stormtroopers like they were toys. He'd learned, somewhere in the gamma-radiated depths of his rage, that these white-armored soldiers were bad, were enemies, were trying to hurt his friends. So he didn't hold back. He grabbed an AT-ST that had deployed from a nearby garrison and simply pulled its legs apart, tearing the walker in half with a screech of tortured metal. A squad of stormtroopers tried to concentrate fire on one target, following their training to focus overwhelming force. Against the Hulk, it just made them an easier target. He picked up a cargo container, 10 meters long, filled with rations, and threw it like a bowling ball. Stormtroopers scattered, but not fast enough. "Hulk, strongest there is," he roared triumphantly, pounding his chest. In the command center, Steve had zip-tied the officers and was downloading every file Jarvis could access. Imperial deployment schedules, supply chain logistics, personnel rosters, intelligence reports, everything that could help the rebellion. "Captain, we have a problem," Jarvis said. "I'm detecting a hyperspace signature. Something large is approaching the system." Steve's jaw tightened. "How large?" "Star Destroyer class, sir. ETA 12 minutes. "Everyone, we've got incoming." Steve transmitted to the team. "Star Destroyer inbound. We need to complete the mission and extract now." Tony was already at Warehouse 7's main computer terminal, his armor's interface jacked directly into Imperial systems. "Setting charges. Jarvis, how much time do I need for a total detonation?" Given the volatile nature of the stored munitions, a cascade explosion would require only minimal triggering charges. I recommend less technical, more practical. Plant 3 charges at structural weak points. Everything else will detonate sympathetically. Estimated blast radius, 2 kilometers. "That's going to be quite a boom," Tony muttered, already moving to position the first charge, a modified arc reactor core set to overload. "Cap, we need to be at least 3 clicks away when this goes up." Thor landed beside the Hulk, who was using an unconscious stormtrooper's helmet as a drum. "My friend, we must depart. Our objective is complete." The Hulk looked disappointed, but Hulks still want to smash. "And you shall smash again another day," Thor promised. "But today, we must ensure these weapons never reach Imperial hands. Come, Banner's friends need us." Reluctantly, the Hulk allowed himself to be guided toward the stolen shuttle, where Natasha and Clint were already firing up the engines. Steve arrived moments later, databanks full of stolen intelligence. Tony was the last aboard, his hand on the detonator. "Everyone strapped in?" he asked. "Just fly," Clint shouted from the pilot's seat. The shuttle lifted off as blaster fire chased them into Naboo's atmosphere. Behind them, the depot was in chaos. Fires burning, structures collapsed, stormtroopers trying desperately to organize as the Empire's entire operational capability for the sector smoldered in ruins. Tony watched through the shuttle's rear camera as they cleared the blast radius. "Jarvis, light it up." The first charge detonated. The arc reactor core overloaded, releasing energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon directly into Warehouse 7's ammunition stockpiles. The chain reaction was instantaneous. Thermal detonators cooking off, blaster power cells rupturing, weapons-grade explosives igniting in a cascading inferno. The depot disappeared in a fireball visible from orbit, a mushroom cloud rising into Naboo's pristine atmosphere. The shockwave flattened everything within 2 kilometers. And the electromagnetic pulse from Tony's specially designed charges fried every electronic system in a 10-kilometer radius. On the Star Destroyer that had just dropped out of hyperspace, Admiral Donnick Krelln watched the destruction through the viewport, his face ashen. "Get me a status report. What just happened?" "Sir, Depot RX-7 has been completely destroyed," a sensor officer reported. "Total loss of all personnel and materiel. I'm reading residual energy signatures consistent with..." He paused, checking his readings again. "Consistent with the technology we don't have in our databases." Krelln's fist clenched. "Find that shuttle. Deploy all TIE fighters. I want those terrorists captured or destroyed." But the Avengers shuttle was already jumping to hyperspace. Coordinates calculated by Jarvis before the Empire could establish a tractor beam lock. The stars stretched into lines, and they were gone, leaving behind only ruins and the growing realization in Imperial Command that they were facing an enemy unlike any they'd encountered before. In his meditation chamber aboard the Executor, Darth Vader felt the disturbance in the Force, not the warriors themselves, for they remained invisible to his senses, but the ripples their actions created across the galaxy. Anger, fear, hope, all swirling around these 6 impossible beings. "They struck at Naboo," Admiral Piet reported nervously. "Destroyed an entire depot. Casualties estimated at over 200 Imperial personnel." Vader's respirator was the only sound for a long moment. Then, "They have declared war. Very well. We shall give them one." He turned to face Piet, his mask reflecting the chamber's dim lights. "Inform the Emperor that I am taking personal command of this operation. And contact every Imperial garrison, every Star Destroyer, every Inquisitor still breathing." His fist clenched slowly. These warriors will learn that in this galaxy, power without the Force is meaningless against a Sith Lord. The rebel base erupted in celebration when the Avengers returned. News of the Naboo depot's destruction had spread through the Alliance's communication networks like wildfire. Not just the military victory, but the symbolic one. 6 warriors against an entire Imperial installation, and the Empire had lost everything. 50 battalions worth of weapons gone, General Draven said, reviewing the after-action reports in the command center. Deployment schedules disrupted across 6 sectors. "And the intelligence you extracted?" He pulled up holographic displays showing Imperial fleet movements, garrison rotations, supply chain vulnerabilities. "This is the most comprehensive data we've had in years. You just gave us operational advantage across the entire outer rim." Tony was already analyzing the data with Jarvis, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. These supply routes are inefficient. The Empire's logistics are spread too thin trying to maintain control across so many systems. If you hit them here, here, and here. He highlighted 3 intersections on the galactic map. You could create cascading shortages that would cripple their offensive capabilities for months. Hera studied the proposed strikes with professional appreciation. You think like a strategist, Stark. But those targets are heavily defended. We don't have the resources to hit all three simultaneously. Then we prioritize, Steve said, joining them at the tactical display. He'd spent the last hour in debriefing, walking Alliance intelligence through every detail of the Naboo operation. Which target hurts them most? Drevin pointed to a system in the mid-rim. Renvar. It's a logistics hub. Everything flowing to Imperial forces in 4 sectors passes through there. But it's protected by 2 Star Destroyers and a garrison of 5,000 troops. We'd need an army to take it. Or 6 people who are really good at their jobs, Clint said from where he was maintaining his bow. We just proved we can hit targets that should be impossible. Why stop now? Because every time you strike, the Empire learns, a new voice said. Princess Leia entered the command center, her presence immediately commanding attention. She'd arrived from another rebel cell within the hour of their return, desperate to meet the warriors who'd accomplished the impossible. You've made yourselves famous or infamous, depending on perspective. The Empire knows your capabilities now. They'll adapt. Thor, who'd been regaling a group of young rebel pilots with tales of Asgard, turned at her words. Let them adapt. We have faced enemies who learned from each encounter, Ultron, who evolved with every battle. Yet we prevailed because we fought not just with power, but with purpose. Leia studied the Asgardian god with keen intelligence. And what is your purpose here, Thor of Asgard? You're not citizens of this galaxy. You owe us nothing. Why risk your lives for our war? The room fell silent, everyone waiting for the answer. It was the question they'd all been asking since the Avengers arrived. Why would beings of such power care about their small rebellion? Steve stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of conviction earned through decades of fighting for what was right. Because tyranny is tyranny, no matter what galaxy it happens in. Because we've seen what happens when people with power stand aside and let evil flourish. And because he looked around at the rebel personnel, at their worn uniforms and determined faces, at the impossible odds they faced every single day. Because you're fighting the good fight, and we've never been able to walk away from that. Pretty words, Leia said. But there was warmth in her voice now, not challenge. But the Empire won't care about your noble intentions. They care about one thing: crushing anyone who threatens their control. And you 6? You're the biggest threat they've faced since the Jedi Order fell. Good, Natasha said coldly. Let them come. We've been playing defense since we got here. Maybe it's time we made them afraid. Bruce, who'd been quiet since they returned, always processing, always worried about the Hulk's next emergence, spoke up hesitantly. But how long can we keep this up? Every mission risks more civilian casualties. Every strike makes the Empire crack down harder. We're not solving the problem. We're just making noise. It was the concern that had been gnawing at Steve since Naboo. They could win tactical victories, could destroy Imperial assets, could inspire the rebellion. But inspiration didn't translate to victory against an enemy that controlled a galaxy. The Empire could absorb losses that would cripple any Earth-based military. They could replace destroyed depots, recruit more Stormtroopers, build more Star Destroyers. He's right, Steve admitted. We need more than hit-and-run raids. We need a strategic victory that fundamentally changes the war's trajectory. We need to cut the head off the snake, Tony said, his voice hard. The Emperor. Take him out and the whole Empire collapses. We've tried. Draven said quietly. The Emperor is protected by the most sophisticated security in the galaxy. He rarely leaves Coruscant, and when he does, he's surrounded by the Imperial Guard and protected by Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer and the most powerful Sith Lord alive. Vader, Thor mused. We have heard this name several times now. The Inquisitors served him. The Star Destroyers hunt for him. Who is this dark warrior? Leia's expression darkened. He's death incarnate. Once, he was a Jedi named Anakin Skywalker, the most powerful Force user the Order had ever seen. But he fell to the dark side, helped the Emperor destroy the Jedi, and became Vader. He's killed more people than you can count, destroyed entire worlds, and crushed every challenge to the Empire's rule for 20 years. And his capabilities? Steve asked, always analyzing threats. He can choke you from across a room using the Force, Hera said, having witnessed Vader's power firsthand during the Lothal campaign. He can deflect blaster fire with a lightsaber without looking, sense your presence through walls, and crush metal with his mind. I once saw him pull a fleeing transport ship out of the sky through sheer will. He's not just a warrior. He's something beyond that. Sounds like fun, Clint said dryly. Anyone got a manual for fighting psychic space wizards? The Jedi did, Leia said. But most of that knowledge died with them. What we do know is that Vader seems particularly interested in U-6. Our intelligence network intercepted Imperial communications. He's personally taken command of the operation to find you. He's searching every system, questioning every contact, deploying resources that should be used fighting the rebellion. Then we've already won a strategic victory, Natasha observed. We're forcing the Empire to divert resources away from fighting you and toward chasing us. That's an advantage. Until Vader finds you, Draven said grimly. And then it becomes a massacre. No one survives an encounter with Vader. Thor's eyes flashed with lightning. Perhaps no one from this galaxy has survived, but we are not bound by your galaxy's rules. An alarm klaxon cut through the discussion. A rebel technician's voice crackled over the intercom. General Draven, we have multiple hyperspace signatures. Capital ships dropping out near the system's edge. Everyone rushed to the command center's main display. The holographic image showed 5 Star Destroyers emerging from hyperspace in a formation that spoke of coordinated assault. They weren't random patrols. This was a deliberate attack. How did they find us? Leia demanded. The cloaking field should have... They didn't find the base, Tony said, his sensors analyzing the Imperial formation. They're casting a net. See how they're positioned? They're creating a sensor grid to scan the entire system. It's a brute force search. They know we're here somewhere, Draven said, already issuing evacuation orders. We have maybe an hour before they narrow down our location. All personnel to evacuation stations. Begin emergency protocols. The base transformed into controlled chaos. Rebel soldiers rushed to ships. Technicians frantically erased computer files. Supplies were loaded with desperate speed. The cloaking field that had protected them for months had become a death trap. Once the Empire found them, there would be no escape. Steve's tactical mind was already running scenarios, all of them bad. How many people are on this base? 2,000 personnel, Hera said, rushing toward the Ghost. 300 fighters, maybe 50 transports. But we can't launch everyone at once without revealing our position. And once we're in space, those Star Destroyers will shred us. Then we need to give them something else to focus on, Steve said. Something that draws their attention away from the evacuation. Tony turned to him, and even through the faceplate, Steve could sense his friend's grim understanding. "You're suggesting we take on 5 Star Destroyers." "I'm suggesting we buy time," Steve corrected. "We don't have to win. We just have to create enough chaos that the rebels can escape." "That's suicide," Draven said flatly. "No," Natasha said, already checking her weapons. "That's the job." Thor hefted Mjolnir, lightning already dancing along its surface. "I have fought frost giants and fire demons. I have battled the armies of Hela and stood against Thanos' hordes. 5 ships, even ships of such size, do not frighten me." The Hulk, sensing the coming battle, was already pressing at Bruce's consciousness. Bruce closed his eyes, took a breath, and nodded. "Let's do this." Clint looked at his quiver, 30 arrows remaining after Naboo, and shrugged. "Well, I wasn't planning to die of old age anyway." Leia grabbed Steve's arm. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "Princess," Steve said gently, "we've been soldiers long enough to know when there's no other way. Get your people out. That's an order I have the authority to give, even in someone else's galaxy." They took the captured Imperial shuttle. Its transponder codes long since burned, but its basic systems still functional. As they launched from Base Omega's hidden hangar, Steve looked back at the cloaked moon where the rebellion's heart beat steadily, where hope persisted against impossible odds. "Jarvis, broadcast on all Imperial frequencies," Tony said. "Let's make sure we have their attention." "Channel open, sir." Tony's voice, amplified and broadcast across every Star Destroyer's bridge, echoed through the void. "Attention, Imperial forces. This is Iron Man of the Avengers. You're looking for us? Well, here we are. Come and get us." On the bridge of the lead Star Destroyer, Admiral Kendall Ozzel received the transmission with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Lock onto that signal. Deploy all TIE fighters. All ships converge on—" "Admiral," his sensor officer interrupted. "The shuttle it's heading directly toward us, at attack speed." Ozzel stared at the tactical display, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. One small shuttle, charging toward 5 Star Destroyers. Is this some kind of trick? "Unknown, sir. But I'm reading 6 life signs aboard. Humanoid. It matches the profile of the wanted terrorists." "Then they're either insane or incredibly foolish," Ozzel said. "All batteries, open fire. I want that shuttle vaporized." Hundreds of turbo lasers opened fire, green lances of energy filling space. The shuttle should have been destroyed instantly. Instead, it jinked and rolled with impossible precision, Jarvis's processing power allowing it to thread between energy blasts that should have been unavoidable. "They're going to hit us," Steve said, gripping his shield as the lead Star Destroyer filled the viewport. "That's the idea," Tony replied. "Brace for impact in 3, 2, 1. The shuttle didn't crash. At the last possible moment, the rear hatch exploded outward, and 6 figures launched into space on individual vectors. Tony fired repulsors, his armor's systems already adjusting for hard vacuum. Thor used Mjolnir to propel himself like a missile, lightning wreathing his body even in the airless void. Steve, Natasha, and Clint wore emergency EVA suits Tony had fabricated, crude by his standards but functional. And the Hulk, impossibly, was simply holding his breath again, his gamma-enhanced physiology allowing him to survive where humans couldn't. They struck the Star Destroyer's hull like meteors. The Hulk's impact cratered Durasteel armor plating, and he immediately began tearing into the ship's outer hull with his bare hands, ripping away sections of armor to expose the inner workings. Electrical systems sparked, atmosphere vented, and crew members were pulled screaming into the void before emergency bulkheads could seal. Thor landed on one of the massive shield generators and brought Mjolnir down with all his godly strength. The generator cracked, sparked, and exploded, taking down a quarter of the Star Destroyer's defensive shields. He was already moving to the next target, a whirlwind of destruction. Tony located the ship's main sensor array, a massive dish that coordinated targeting for dozens of turbo lasers. Jarvis, let's give them something to really worry about. His arc reactor channeled power to his unibeam, and he fired at maximum output. The concentrated energy beam punched through the sensor array's housing, melting circuitry and fusing components. The Star Destroyer's targeting systems went haywire, turbo lasers firing randomly as their guidance systems failed. On the bridge, alarms screamed. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, an officer shouted. "Shield generator offline, targeting computers malfunctioning." "How are 6 individuals doing this?" Ozzel roared. He received his answer when Thor crashed through the bridge viewport, Mjolnir leading. The transparent steel, designed to withstand micrometeorite impacts, shattered like glass. Thor stood in the center of the bridge, surrounded by shocked Imperial officers, lightning dancing across his armor. "I am Thor, son of Odin, and I have come to deliver a message to your empire." His voice boomed through the bridge. "Leave these people alone, or face the wrath of warriors who fear nothing, not even death itself." Ozzel drew his sidearm. Thor gestured negligently, and lightning arced from his hand, frying the weapon without touching the Admiral. That was a warning. The next one will not be. Outside, the other 4 Star Destroyers were converging, TIE fighters swarming like angry insects. Steve, Natasha, and Clint had made it back to the damaged shuttle, using it for cover as they engaged the fighters. Steve's shield flew in impossible arcs, striking TIE fighter viewports with precision that defied physics. Each throw was perfect, each return caught with practiced ease. Natasha and Clint worked from the shuttle's jury-rigged weapons, their combined fire creating a zone of death that TIE fighters couldn't penetrate. But they were being overwhelmed, and everyone knew it. "Cap, we've got maybe 2 minutes before they surround us," Clint called out, firing his last explosive arrow into a cluster of fighters. "Then we make those 2 minutes count," Steve replied. Tony streaked between the Star Destroyers, drawing fire, creating chaos. "Jarvis, how are our rebel friends doing?" "Evacuation is 70% complete, sir. However, one of the Star Destroyers has detected launch signatures from Base Omega. They're moving to intercept." "Not on my watch." Tony changed course, rocketing toward the Star Destroyer that was angling toward the fleeing rebel transports. He could see them now, dozens of small ships, carrying the Alliance's hope, making their desperate run for hyperspace. The Star Destroyer's main batteries were charging, targeting solutions locked on the transports. In seconds, hundreds of rebels would die. Tony pushed his armor to its limits, routing all power to forward shields and repulsors. He struck the Star Destroyer's main targeting computer from the outside. His armor's interface hacking into their systems even as turbo lasers fired around him. "Jarvis, I need a miracle." "Uploading viral code now, sir. It will corrupt their targeting matrices for approximately 30 seconds. "That'll have to be enough." The Star Destroyer's weapons fired and missed. Every shot went wide by meters as corrupted targeting data fed incorrect coordinates. The rebel transports jumped to hyperspace one by one, white lines stretching across the black as they escaped. On Base Omega, Leia watched the last transport vanish and allowed herself one moment of relief. They'd made it. The Avengers had given them the time they needed. "May the Force be with them," she whispered. In space, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The Hulk had torn through 3 decks of the lead Star Destroyer, causing enough damage that the ship was listing, emergency crews struggling to contain fires and seal breaches. Thor had disabled 2 more shield generators and was fighting his way through Stormtroopers who'd finally organized a response. But even the Avengers had limits. Tony's armor was showing critical damage warnings, his power at 40%. Steve's EVA suit had been punctured in 3 places, and he was operating on stored oxygen that wouldn't last much longer. Natasha and Clint were down to their last ammunition reserves. "Time to go," Tony transmitted. "Everyone, extraction point in 30 seconds. Thor grabbed Admiral Ozzel, who'd been trying to rally his bridge crew. "Tell your Emperor that his reign of terror ends now. Tell Vader that we do not fear him. And tell every Imperial in this galaxy that the Avengers are here. And we fight for freedom." He threw the Admiral into a command chair and leapt back out through the shattered viewport, Mjolnir pulling him toward the rendezvous point where Tony had positioned their escape shuttle. The Hulk roared one final time, grabbed a structural support beam, and ripped it free. The Star Destroyer's entire starboard section groaned as structural integrity failed. Then he pushed off, his massive leap carrying him through vacuum toward his friends. They piled into the shuttle as TIE fighters converged from all directions. Jarvis had already calculated jump coordinates, anywhere but here. The hyperdrive engaged just as turbolaser fire engulfed their position. The stars stretched into lines, and they were gone. Behind them, 5 Star Destroyers hung in space, 1 critically damaged, all of them bearing scars from an encounter that shouldn't have been possible. Admiral Ozzel stood on his ruined bridge, staring at the void where the Avengers had been. "Get me Lord Vader," he said quietly. "He needs to know what we just faced." The Executor was a monument to Imperial might. A superstar destroyer 8 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. Darth Vader stood on its bridge, an imposing figure in black as Admiral Ozzel's hologram flickered before him, the man visibly shaken as he delivered his report. 6 individuals, Lord Vader. They disabled 1 Star Destroyer, damaged 3 others, and caused the evacuation of an entire rebel base before we could prevent it. Our casualties number in the hundreds. Structural damage will take weeks to repair, and... Ozzel hesitated. "And they issued a direct challenge to you, my lord." Vader's respirator was the only sound for several heartbeats. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of cold fury. "You allowed 6 warriors to humiliate an entire battle group. My lord, they demonstrated capabilities beyond anything we've encountered. One of them tears through Dura steel with bare hands. Another generates lightning that overloads our systems. A third wears powered armor more sophisticated than anything in Imperial databases." Excuses. Vader's fist clenched, and through the Force, Ozzel felt invisible fingers tighten around his throat. The Admiral gasped, clawing at his neck even though his attacker was light years away. "You had overwhelming superiority, and you failed. Captain Piet?" A younger officer stepped forward, his face carefully neutral despite the horror of watching his superior slowly strangled through a hologram. "Yes, Lord Vader? You are promoted to Admiral. Ozzel has proven himself inadequate." Vader released his grip, and the hologram showed Ozzel collapsing, dead before he hit the deck. "Retrieve his body and continue the search. I want every Imperial asset in 6 sectors looking for these Avengers. Deploy probe droids to every system, offer increased bounties, and inform the Inquisitorius. His mask turned toward the shadows, where 3 robed figures waited. That I require their services immediately. The Inquisitors stepped forward. The Grand Inquisitor, a Pau'an with sharp features and yellow eyes, bowed. What is your command, Lord Vader? These warriors fight without the Force, yet they possess power that rivals Force users. I want them found. I want them studied. And then I want them destroyed. Vader pulled up holographic images captured from Azel's engagement. Thor wreathed in lightning, the Hulk tearing through Dura-Steel, Iron Man's armor displaying technology that shouldn't exist. They have made themselves enemies of the Empire. Now they will learn what that means. 3 systems away, in a hidden rebel safe house on the forest moon of Endor, the Avengers were dealing with their own aftermath. Bruce had transformed back and was being examined by a rebel medic droid, his body showing burns and lacerations that were already healing at an accelerated rate. Thor sat in meditation, replenishing his strength after the battle. The others were scattered through the facility, processing what they'd just survived. Tony's armor was in pieces across a workbench, Jarvis running diagnostics, while Tony worked with tools and equipment borrowed from the rebels. The arc reactor had taken damage. Nothing critical, but enough to reduce his power output by 15%. We got lucky, he said to Steve, who was cleaning blaster scoring off his shield. 5-star destroyers. We should be dead. But we're not, Steve replied. And 2,000 rebels are alive because we bought them time. At what cost? Natasha entered, her black uniform torn and scorched. She'd refused medical attention despite visible injuries, old habits from Red Room training where weakness was punished. We've escalated this war beyond anything the rebellion was prepared for. The Empire's not going to treat this as a minor insurgent action. They're going to come at us with everything. Let them, Clint said from where he was crafting new arrows from materials he'd scavenged. We've faced worse. Chitauri, Ultron, Thanos, all on Earth, Bruce interrupted, his voice strained. On our home turf, where we understood the playing field. Here, we're operating blind in a galaxy that has technology and powers we barely understand. And every time I transform, he looked at his hands, remembering the feeling of tearing through a Star Destroyer's hull. The Hulk gets harder to control. The violence here, the constant threat, it's pushing him closer to the surface. Thor placed a hand on Bruce's shoulder. Then we must end this war swiftly, my friend. Not through endless battles, but through a decisive strike that breaks the Empire's ability to oppress. You're talking about assassination, Steve said quietly. Targeting the Emperor. I'm talking about removing a tyrant, Thor corrected. Is that not what you did when you fought the Red Skull? When you brought down Hydra? Sometimes, the only way to stop a war is to remove those who wage it. The door opened and Princess Leia entered, flanked by Hera and General Draven. They looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from coordinating a galaxy-wide evacuation while under Imperial pursuit. But there was also something else in their expressions. Hope. The fleet made it, Leia said without preamble. All transports reached the rendezvous point. Because of you, 2,000 people are alive who would have been captured or killed. The Alliance owes you a debt that can never be repaid. We don't want payment, Steve said. We want to end this, and we've been discussing options. Draven pulled up a portable holographic display showing the galaxy with Imperial-controlled systems marked in red. There were far too many. The strategic situation is grim. The Empire controls 70% of known space. They have unlimited resources, industrial capacity that dwarfs the rebellion 1,000 to 1, and a military force that can absorb losses that would destroy any other government. But they're centralized, Tony observed, studying the display with tactical interest. Everything flows from Coruscant. The Emperor makes the decisions, Vader enforces them, and the rest of the Empire follows orders. It's efficient but brittle. Remove the head, and the body doesn't know what to do. We've considered targeting the Emperor, Hera admitted. But he's protected by layers of security that make our raid on Naboo look simple. The Imperial Palace on Coruscant is a fortress. He travels on heavily armed Star Destroyers with entire battle groups as escorts. And he's always protected by Vader and the Imperial Guard, elite warriors who've trained their entire lives to die protecting him. Plus, Druvin added grimly, he's a Sith Lord, possibly the most powerful Force user alive. According to legends, he can kill with a thought, bend minds, see the future. Attacking him directly would be suicide. Unless you had people he can't predict, Natasha said. His Force visions, his precognition, that only works on things connected to the Force, right? We're not from this galaxy. We're not connected to his mystical energy field. Which means he can't see us coming, Tony finished, his eyes lighting up with the kind of dangerous enthusiasm he got when presented with an impossible problem. We're blind spots in his precognition, ghosts in his Force visions. He can predict what the rebels will do, what other Force users will attempt, but he can't predict us. Leia's expression was conflicted, caught between hope and horror at what they were suggesting. You're talking about infiltrating Coruscant, penetrating the Imperial Palace, and assassinating the Emperor. That's never been attempted because everyone who's tried has died before getting close. Everyone from this galaxy, Thor said. But as Lady Natasha observed, we're something new, something unexpected. And in my experience, tyrants fear the unexpected more than they fear armies. Steve stood, his tactical mind already running through scenarios. We'd need intelligence. Palace layouts, security protocols, the Emperor's schedule. We'd need to know Vader's location. He's the wild card. And we'd need an extraction plan because even if we succeed, we'll have the entire Imperial military hunting us. You're serious about this, Druvin said, disbelief and awe mixing in his voice. You're actually considering assassinating the Emperor. We're considering ending a war, Steve corrected. There's a difference. We're not murderers, General. But we're also not going to stand by while billions suffer under tyranny. If there's a way to cut this war short and save lives, we have an obligation to try. Clint looked up from his arrow crafting. One problem. We still need to get home. Our entire plan has been to find someone who understands dimensional physics well enough to reverse whatever brought us here. If we kill the Emperor, we lose access to whatever Sith knowledge he's hoarding. Not necessarily, Leia said slowly, an idea forming. The Emperor has vaults, repositories of Sith artifacts, holocrons, ancient texts that he's collected from across the galaxy. If we could access those before neutralizing him, we might find what you need and accomplish our objective. Tony pulled up technical schematics that Jarvis had compiled from hacked Imperial databases. The palace has a sub-level structure. Here, he highlighted a section deep underground. Imperial intelligence reports suggest this is where he stores his most valuable artifacts. It's protected by the best security in the galaxy, but you're Tony Stark and you've hacked everything else in this galaxy. Natasha finished. You think you can get us in? I can get us in, Tony confirmed. Getting out alive is a different question. Bruce had been quiet, processing the magnitude of what they were discussing. This is assassination. We're not soldiers following orders in a declared war. We're talking about infiltrating a capital and killing a head of state. That crosses lines. The Emperor isn't a head of state, Hera said, her voice hard with personal pain. He's a mass murderer who's killed trillions. He destroyed entire species, enslaved populations, and rules through terror. This isn't assassination. It's justice. It's still killing, Bruce insisted. And once we cross that line... We crossed that line on Naboo, Steve said quietly. When we destroyed that depot, we killed Imperial personnel. Soldiers following orders, just doing their jobs. We've already made the choice to engage in this war. Now we have to decide how far we're willing to go to end it. The room fell silent as everyone grappled with the moral weight of what they were contemplating. They were heroes, not assassins. But they were also warriors who understood that sometimes, to save the many, you had to make impossible choices. Thor broke the silence. On Asgard, we have a concept, the king's justice. When a ruler becomes a tyrant, when they break the covenant between leader and people, it falls to warriors to restore balance. Your emperor has broken every covenant. He deserves no mercy. The rebellion's been fighting for years, Leia said. Thousands have died. Entire worlds have been subjugated. If there's a chance, even a small one, to end this without another decade of bloodshed, don't we have an obligation to take it? Steve looked at each of his teammates, reading their expressions. Tony was calculating odds, already planning the infiltration. Natasha showed no emotion, but her posture suggested readiness. She'd done wet work for S.H.I.E.L.D., and this was just another mission. Clint was conflicted but loyal. He'd follow the team's decision. Thor was convinced of the righteousness of their cause. And Bruce was afraid, not of the enemy, but of what they might become. We vote, Steve said. This is too important for me to decide alone. We're a team. So we decide as a team. One by one, they voted. Tony, yes. Natasha, yes. Thor, yes. Clint, yes. Bruce, abstain, but he wouldn't stop them. Steve was last. He thought about the war, about the rebels fighting impossible odds, about the billions suffering under Imperial rule. He thought about the super soldier serum, about how he'd been chosen to be Captain America, not because he was the strongest, but because he understood the value of sacrifice. Yes, he said. We do this. We infiltrate Coruscant, access the Emperor's vaults for information about dimensional travel, and we end the war. One mission, all or nothing. Draven and Leia exchanged glances. Then Leia nodded. Then the rebellion will provide whatever support we can. Intelligence, resources, an extraction team on standby. But understand, if this fails, if you're captured, we can't help you. The Empire will make examples of you that will echo across the galaxy. We've faced those odds before, Steve said, and we're still here. They spent the next 3 days in intensive planning. Alliance intelligence provided everything they had on Coruscant. City layouts, patrol patterns, security protocols. Tony worked with rebel techs to upgrade his armor using Imperial technology, creating hybrid systems that combined Earth ingenuity with galactic engineering. Jarvis absorbed terabytes of data on Sith lore, Force artifacts, and dimensional theory, becoming the galaxy's foremost expert on subjects that had been lost for millennia. Thor spent his time in meditation. communing with the Asgardian magic that connected him to the Nine Realms, seeing if he could sense any connection between his home and this galaxy. He found nothing. They were truly alone, cut off from everything they'd known. Natasha and Clint trained with rebel commandos, learning Imperial security procedures, identification protocols, and the subtle body language of Stormtroopers. They'd need to pass as Imperial personnel for at least part of the infiltration, which meant mastering not just the look, but the mindset. Bruce worked with rebel medical staff, trying to find ways to maintain control over the Hulk's transformations. They had tranquilizers that worked on most species, but gamma-enhanced physiology was beyond their understanding. In the end, Bruce simply accepted that if they needed the Hulk, he'd let him out and pray he could rein him back in. On the fourth day, they were ready. The plan was insane, the odds were impossible, and failure meant not just death, but the rebellion's best chance for victory dying with them. But they were the Avengers. Impossible was what they did. As they boarded a stolen Imperial courier ship, small, fast, with legitimate clearance codes that Jarvis had forged, Steve gathered them for a final briefing. "This is it," he said. "Once we jump to Coruscant, there's no turning back. We'll be in the heart of the Empire, surrounded by millions of enemies. We succeed or we die. Everyone clear?" "Crystal," Tony said, his armor's weapon systems all reading green. "Let's finish this," Natasha added. Thor raised Mjolnir. "For freedom, for justice, for all those who cannot fight for themselves." The ship's hyperdrive engaged, and they leaped into the unknown. Destination, Coruscant. Mission, kill the Emperor and end the war. In his throne room deep within the Imperial Palace, Emperor Palpatine sat in meditation, his yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. The Force swirled around him, visions of futures yet to come, paths the galaxy might take. He saw the rebellion's movements, anticipated their strategies, perceived their desperation. But there was something else. A void in his visions. Spaces where the future became unclear. Powerful beings that existed outside the Force's flow. They were coming for him. He could sense their intent, if not their nature. A smile crept across his withered face. "Lord Vader," he called, and his apprentice emerged from the shadows. "We have visitors coming. Prepare a welcome they will never forget." Coruscant was a planet-wide city, a monument to 10,000 years of civilization, where buildings stretched kilometers into the sky and traffic lanes carried billions of beings in endless streams of light. From orbit, it looked like a jewel. Gleaming towers, atmospheric processors creating artificial weather patterns, defense platforms bristling with enough firepower to repel an armored fleet. The Avengers' stolen courier ship descended through layers of traffic control, Jarvis transmitting perfectly forged clearance codes at every checkpoint. No alarm sounded. No interceptors scrambled. To every scanner, every board traffic controller, they were just another Imperial vessel on routine business. "Almost too easy," Clint muttered from the co-pilot's seat. "Don't jinx it," Natasha replied, piloting with the precise control she'd learned from countless shield operations. The cityscape spread beneath them, the Senate building, Imperial military headquarters, and there, dominating the center like a dark crown, the Imperial Palace. It was massive, a fortress disguised as architecture. Spires reached toward space, each one bristling with sensor arrays and defensive weapons. Energy shields shimmered invisibly around the perimeter. Stormtroopers patrolled in precise formations, and Imperial guards, the elite warriors in crimson armor, stood watch at every entrance. "Jarvis, you're sure about the entry point?" Steve asked, checking his shield one final time. "As certain as possible given the data available, Captain." The maintenance sublevel provides access to the lower vaults with minimal security presence. However, the AI paused in a way that would have been dramatic if Jarvis were capable of drama. I'm detecting unusual energy patterns throughout the palace. Something is interfering with my sensor readings. The Force, Thor said grimly. The dark side is strong in this place. I can feel it pressing against my senses like a physical weight. Tony's HUD was showing similar anomalies. Whatever's down there, it's throwing off every scanner I've got. We're going in half blind. They landed at a service platform on the palace's 500th sublevel, where maintenance droids and supply ships arrived in endless rotation. Stormtroopers checked their credentials, forged identities as Imperial technicians responding to a fabricated maintenance request. Jarvis had inserted the work order into Imperial systems 3 days ago, complete with authorization codes and supervisor signatures. The sergeant examined their data pads, then waved them through. Bay 7, make it quick. The Emperor doesn't tolerate inefficiency. Understood, Natasha replied in clipped Imperial Basic, and they moved deeper into the palace. The corridors were sterile, all sharp angles and cold lighting designed to make everyone feel small and insignificant. They passed clusters of Imperial officers, bureaucrats moving between assignments, and the occasional Stormtrooper patrol. No one gave them a second glance. Imperial uniforms were armor in their own way, making the wearer invisible through conformity. Bruce was sweating despite the climate-controlled environment. The Hulk was close to the surface, agitated by the dark energy permeating the palace. How much farther? 2 more levels, Tony said, reading the map Jarvis had constructed. Then we're at the vault access point. After that, alarm klaxons shrieked through the corridor. Red emergency lights began flashing. A computerized voice echoed from hidden speakers. Security alert. Intruders detected. All personnel report to stations. Lockdown protocols in effect. So much for stealth, Clint said, already pulling his bow from the equipment case they disguised as a toolkit. Blast doors began descending at both ends of the corridor. Steve reacted instantly, throwing his shield. It wedged into the descending door mechanism, buying them precious seconds. Move, now! They ran. Behind them, stormtroopers were mobilizing, their boots echoing through the corridors. Ahead, more troops were converging. They'd been expected. Every step had been anticipated. It's a trap, Natasha said, the words barely out before the corridor erupted in blaster fire. Steve's shield deflected the first volley. Thor summoned lightning that arced between stormtroopers, overloading their armor systems. Tony engaged his repulsors and shot forward, laying down suppressing fire that forced the Imperial forces into cover. But more were coming. Dozens, then hundreds. The entire palace garrison was mobilizing. They fought their way down 2 more levels, each corridor a killing field, each turn revealing more enemies. Clint's arrows found gaps in armor with deadly precision. Natasha moved like liquid death, her weapons never empty, her movements economical and lethal. Steve anchored their defense, his shield an impenetrable wall that gave his team the space to fight. And then Bruce lost control. A blaster bolt seared across his shoulder, and the pain triggered the transformation. His skin turned green, muscles exploded with mass, and the Hulk emerged with a roar that shook the entire sublevel. He grabbed a stormtrooper and used him as a battering ram against his fellows, then tore through a blast door like it was paper. "Hulk smash Emperor!" he bellowed, and charged toward the lower levels with single-minded fury. "Follow him," Steve ordered. "He's going the right direction anyway." The Hulk carved a path of destruction through Imperial forces. Stormtroopers fired at him until their weapons overheated, but gamma-enhanced flesh absorbed blaster fire that would have vaporized normal tissue. He was unstoppable, a force of nature given form and fury, and nothing in the Empire's arsenal could slow him. They reached the vault level just as the Hulk tore through the final security door. Inside was a chamber that seemed to exist outside normal reality. The walls were lined with shelves holding artifacts that radiated dark power. Scythe holocrons glowed with malevolent red light. Ancient weapons hung on display. And at the center, a collection of texts and devices that predated the Republic itself. "Jarvis, start downloading everything," Tony ordered, jacking his armor's interface into the vault's computer systems. Data began flowing. Terabytes of Sith knowledge, Force techniques, and yes, theories on dimensional travel and space-time manipulation. Thor approached one of the holocrons, feeling the darkness radiating from it. "This place is evil made manifest. Whatever knowledge is here was paid for in blood and suffering. Then we're taking it to make sure it can never be used again," Steve said. "How long, Tony?" 2 minutes for everything. 1 minute for just the dimensional research." Alarms were still blaring, and the sound of marching boots echoed through the levels above them. "But I don't think we have 2 minutes." The temperature in the vault dropped precipitously. Frost formed on the shelves. And a presence entered the room, a darkness so profound it made the Sith artifacts seem like candles before a sun. Darth Vader stood in the doorway, his black armor seeming to drink in the light. His respirator marked steady rhythm, the only sound in the suddenly silent chamber. Behind him, 3 Inquisitors took flanking positions, their lightsabers ignited and spinning. "So," Vader's voice resonated with power that went beyond mere volume. The mysterious warriors finally revealed themselves. "You have caused the Empire considerable difficulty. That ends now." The Hulk charged immediately. No hesitation, no fear. He swung a fist that could shatter starship hulls. Vader didn't move. He simply raised one hand, and the Force caught the Hulk mid-strike, holding him suspended in midair. "Impossible." Bruce's voice emerged from the Hulk's throat, confusion mixing with rage. "Hulk, strongest there is. Strength without discipline is worthless," Vader said, and flexed his will. The Hulk was thrown backward through 3 walls, his massive form leaving Hulk-shaped holes in durasteel and stone. Thor launched himself at Vader, Mjolnir crackling with divine lightning. The hammer struck where Vader had stood, but the Sith Lord had moved with Force-enhanced speed, appearing behind Thor with his lightsaber descending in a killing strike. The blade met Asgardian armor and actually bit into it, the plasma cutting deeper than any Earth weapon could. Thor grunted in pain and spun, bringing Mjolnir around in a backhand that caught Vader's chest plate. The impact sent the Dark Lord flying, but he twisted in midair and landed on his feet, seemingly unharmed despite the force of a god's blow. "You are strong," Vader acknowledged, "but strength alone cannot defeat the dark side." He raised both hands, and Force lightning erupted from his fingers, not the crude technique of the Inquisitors, but pure dark side energy that warped reality around it. It struck Thor with the power of a star's core. And even Asgardian durability had limits. Thor screamed, his body convulsing as electricity coursed through him. "Thor!" Steve threw his shield, putting all his super soldier strength behind it. The vibranium disc struck Vader's outstretched hand, disrupting his concentration. The lightning ceased, and Thor collapsed, smoke rising from his armor. Vader caught the returning shield with the Force, examining it with interest. Fascinating. A metal that absorbs energy. Your galaxy has interesting materials. He crushed it in his telekinetic grip, except the shield didn't break. Vibranium was proof against even force-enhanced pressure. Steve caught his returning shield and charged. He'd fought gods, monsters, and aliens. One more opponent, even one with mystical powers, was just another mission. He moved with decades of combat experience, shield strikes flowing into attacks, never staying in one position long enough for Vader to lock him down with telekinesis. Vader's lightsaber met the shield in a shower of sparks. The super soldier and the Sith Lord traded blows with inhuman speed. Steve's training against Vader's precognition. But for every strike Steve landed, Vader seemed to know where the next one would come from. You fight well for one without the Force, Vader said, his blade probing Steve's defenses. But you cannot win. I can see your every move before you make it. Then stop seeing, Tony said, and fired his unibeam at maximum power. The concentrated energy struck Vader in the back, and for the first time, the Dark Lord staggered. His armor system sparked, life support momentarily disrupted. He spun, his lightsaber deflecting Tony's follow-up repulsor blasts. But the momentary distraction was enough. Natasha and Clint had been circling, waiting for an opening. Clint fired an arrow that shouldn't have worked, a projectile against a precognitive Force user. But Vader was focused on Tony and Steve, his attention divided. The arrow struck his helmet with enough force to crack the faceplate. Vader's respirator hitched. Atmosphere from the vault began seeping into his damaged suit. He reached up, feeling the crack, and for just a moment, pure rage radiated from him. Not the controlled darkness he usually wielded, but raw, primal fury. "You dare," he started, and then the Hulk returned. The green giant had been thrown through walls, but gamma rage didn't diminish, it grew. He emerged from the hole he'd created, even larger than before, his eyes glowing with radioactive fury. Hulk mad now. He grabbed Vader before the Sith Lord could react and simply hurled him upward. Vader crashed through ceiling after ceiling, traveling 10 levels in seconds before his force powers let him arrest his momentum. "Download complete," Jarvis announced. "I have everything related to dimensional travel, space-time manipulation, and force-based transportation techniques." "Then we're leaving," Steve ordered. "Extraction Point Alpha, now." The Inquisitors moved to block their exit. Thor, recovered enough to fight, met them with Mjolnir. Lightning filled the vault as God and Dark Force users clashed. The Inquisitors were skilled, their lightsabers spinning in deadly arcs. But Thor had fought for 1,000 years. He knew combat in ways they couldn't comprehend. Tony blasted an exit through the vault's exterior wall, revealing Coruscant's cityscape kilometers below. "This way, we've got a ship on approach." The Ghost materialized through the city's traffic lanes, Hera at the controls, pushing the freighter to its limits. Its dorsal turret fired, providing covering fire as the Avengers fought their way toward the opening. But Vader was returning, dropping through the holes in the ceiling like a dark meteor. His lightsaber ignited, and he moved with renewed fury, his damaged armor leaking atmosphere, but his power undiminished. He raised his hand toward the fleeing Avengers, and the entire palace shook. Another presence entered the battlefield, one that made even Vader seem small. Emperor Palpatine emerged from the shadows, his yellow eyes blazing with malevolent power. He was ancient, withered, but the force around him was a maelstrom of darkness. "Impressive," the Emperor said, his voice raspy but carrying absolute authority. "You've done what no one has in 20 years, penetrated my vault, fought Vader to a standstill, and nearly escaped. Nearly." He raised both hands. "But I am not Vader. I am the dark side made flesh. Force lightning erupted from his fingertips, not in controlled bolts, but in a storm that filled the entire chamber. It was power on a scale the Avengers had never faced. Raw, malevolent energy that existed to cause pain and destruction. Thor tried to absorb it with Mjolnir, but this was different from natural lightning. It was darkness given form, and it burned through Asgardian defenses. Steve's shield provided some protection, but the lightning arced around it, striking from impossible angles. Tony's armor's shields overloaded in seconds, warnings screaming across his HUD. The Hulk roared and charged directly at the Emperor. Force lightning struck him full force, and even gamma-enhanced tissue had limits. His skin burned, his muscles convulsed, but he kept moving through sheer will and rage. "Hulk, strongest," he gasped, his fist drawing back for a strike that would pulp the Emperor's ancient body. Palpatine stopped smiling. His expression went cold, calculating, and he channeled more power than he'd used in decades. The Force lightning intensified 100-fold, and even the Hulk, who'd fought gods and withstood the Infinity Stones, was driven to his knees. "No," Palpatine said. "I am. Everyone out? Now!" Tony grabbed the Hulk, an act of insane bravery given the lightning still coursing through the green giant, and fired his repulsors at maximum, propelling them both toward the Ghost. Steve, Natasha, and Clint were already aboard. Thor was the last, retreating from Vader and the Inquisitors with Mjolnir spinning to deflect incoming attacks. The Ghost's boarding ramp closed as Hera punched the engines. They shot away from the palace, TIE fighters and defense platforms opening fire from all directions. The ship's shields flared under the onslaught, but Hera's piloting was supernatural. She threaded between buildings, dodged turbo-laser fire, and executed maneuvers that made Tony's armor's inertial dampeners scream warnings. "Jump to hyperspace," Steve ordered. "Can't," Hera replied. "They've got interdiction fields active. We're trapped in the system until we get past them." Behind them, a fleet of Star Destroyers was moving to intercept. Vader's flagship, the Executor, was among them, its massive bulk accelerating toward their position. Tony's mind raced through options. They had the data. They'd penetrated the Emperor's vault and survived. But survival meant nothing if they were captured or killed before they could use what they'd learned. "Jarvis, I need a distraction. Something big." "Sir, I have a suggestion. The palace's main reactor is powered by a hypermatter core. If we could cause a feedback cascade, it would explode like a small sun," Tony finished. "How fast can you hack their systems?" "I'm already in, sir. But this will cause massive collateral damage. The explosion would devastate several city blocks." Tony looked at Steve, the unspoken question in his eyes. Steve's jaw tightened. Thousands of civilians lived in those blocks. Imperial personnel, yes, but also bureaucrats, janitors, families, people just trying to survive under the Empire's rule. But if they didn't escape, the rebellion would lose its best chance at victory. Millions more would die under continued Imperial rule. "Do it," Steve said, and hated himself for the words. Jarvis triggered the cascade. Deep within the palace, safety protocols failed. The hypermatter core began an uncontrolled reaction. Alarms shrieked through every level as automated systems tried and failed to contain the building energy. The Emperor felt it through the Force and understood immediately what was happening. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with rage at the audacity. "Vader, evacuate the palace. They've triggered the reactor." But it was too late. The reactor reached critical mass, and the Imperial Palace, symbol of the Empire's eternal power, exploded with the force of a fusion bomb. The explosion tore through Coruscant's city levels, vaporizing buildings, creating a mushroom cloud that rose into the planet's atmosphere. Thousands died instantly. Tens of thousands more were injured. And at the center of the destruction, the Emperor and Vader stood protected by force barriers, watching their fortress burn. The Ghost used the chaos to escape the interdiction field, its hyperdrive engaging just as the first wave of TIE fighters caught up. The stars stretched into lines, and they were gone. In the ship's hold, the Avengers lay exhausted, injured, traumatized by what they'd just done. Thor's armor was cracked, lightning burns visible on his skin. The Hulk had transformed back to Bruce, who was unconscious and barely breathing. Tony's armor was in critical condition, systems failing across the board. Steve, Natasha, and Clint were physically intact, but spiritually wounded. They'd gotten the data. They'd struck the Empire's heart and survived. But the cost was written in fire and ash across Coruscant's surface, in the thousands of lives ended by their desperate gambit. Was it worth it? Natasha asked the silence. No one had an answer. The rebel base on Yavin 4. A moon covered in dense jungle, ancient temples, and the desperate hope of a dying rebellion, was where the Avengers finally stopped running. They jumped through 6 systems, changed ships twice, and used every evasion technique the rebellion knew to shake Imperial pursuit. 3 days after Coruscant, they were as safe as anyone fighting the Empire could be. But safety was relative when you just murdered thousands of civilians and declared war on a galactic empire. The medical bay was where Bruce finally woke up, his body still healing from the Emperor's lightning. Rebel doctors had done what they could, but gamma physiology was beyond their understanding. His healing factor was doing the heavy lifting, knitting burned tissue and repairing damaged nerves. But the psychological damage was something no medicine could touch. How many? He asked Thor, who sat vigil beside his bed. The Asgardian didn't pretend to misunderstand. Jarvis estimates between 3,000 and 5,000 casualties from the reactor explosion. Mostly Imperial personnel, but not all, Bruce finished. Civilians. People who were just in the wrong place when we decided to blow up a palace. He closed his eyes, seeing the explosion replay in his mind. We're not heroes anymore, Thor. We're terrorists. We are warriors fighting a war, Thor said, but there was doubt in his voice that hadn't been there before. In war, innocents sometimes don't. Bruce's voice was sharp. Don't justify it. We killed people who weren't soldiers, weren't our enemies. We did it to save our own skins, and nothing makes that right. In the command center, the rest of the team was dealing with their own guilt while trying to focus on the mission. Jarvis had spent 3 days analyzing the data stolen from the Emperor's vaults. Hundreds of Sith holocrons, force techniques spanning millennia, and buried deep within it all. Theories on dimensional travel that might actually work. The Sith called it World Between Worlds, Tony explained, holographic displays showing ancient texts translated into English. A dimension outside normal space-time where all moments exist simultaneously. According to this, powerful Force users could access it, walk through time itself, move between realities. Leia studied the data with a mixture of hope and concern. The cost of obtaining it had been devastating. Not just the lives lost on Coruscant, but the political fallout. The Empire was using the palace explosion as propaganda, painting the rebellion as terrorists willing to kill civilians. Rebel sympathy on dozens of worlds had evaporated overnight. "Can you use this to get home?" she asked. "Maybe," Tony said. The problem is, we're not Force users. These techniques require midi-chlorians, connection to this galaxy's mystical energy field. We don't have that, but... He brought up new schematics. The Sith also built machines, devices that could manipulate space-time without the Force. They're theoretical, never successfully constructed, but the plans are here. Steve studied the designs, his tactical mind working through possibilities. How long to build one? With Rebel resources and Jarvis coordinating, maybe 2 weeks. But there's a problem. Tony highlighted several components. We need materials that don't exist in this galaxy. Exotic matter with negative mass, quantum processors that can handle Planck-scale calculations, and a power source equivalent to several arc reactors running simultaneously. So we're still trapped, Clint said from where he was methodically cleaning his bow. He'd barely spoken since Coruscant, the weight of their actions sitting heavy on him. Not trapped, Natasha corrected. Delayed. We knew getting home wouldn't be simple. But now we have a path forward, theoretical or not. An alarm interrupted the discussion. The base's long-range sensors had detected something. Multiple hyperspace signatures approaching the Yavin system. Dozens of them, then hundreds. On the tactical display, the horror became clear. A massive Imperial fleet was dropping out of hyperspace, star destroyers, support ships, and at the center of it all, the Executor, Vader's flagship, 8 kilometers of death and destruction, leading an armada large enough to conquer a sector. They found us, Hera breathed. But how? We covered our tracks, used every protocol. They didn't track us, Tony said, understanding dawning with sick certainty. They tracked the data we stole. Some kind of quantum marker in the holocrons themselves, something that broadcasts location. We led them right here. The base erupted into controlled chaos. Pilots scrambled to fighters, ground crews armed defensive positions, and Rebel command staff began emergency evacuation protocols. But everyone knew the truth. There was no evacuating an entire base before that fleet arrived. All wings, report in. General John Dodonna's voice came over the comm. This is not a drill. The Empire has found us, and they're coming in force. We need to buy time for the transports to escape. Steve watched the tactical display, his strategic mind running through scenarios. They had maybe 30 Rebel fighters against hundreds of TIE interceptors and bombers. They had minimal ground defenses against an orbital bombardment that could glass the entire moon. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. And it was the Avengers' fault. We did this, he said quietly. We brought them here, which means we're the ones who fix it. Tony's damaged armor was still being repaired, but his eyes hardened with determination. I can't fight at full capacity. My arc reactor is running at 60%. Half my systems are offline. Then we fight at 60%, Steve interrupted. We've faced worse odds. Have we? Clint asked. Because I'm looking at those numbers and thinking maybe this is the one we don't walk away from. Thor stood, Mjolnir in hand despite the burns still visible on his armor. Then we make our stand here. We hold this moon long enough for the rebellion to escape, and we do not yield another inch to tyranny. He looked at each of his teammates. I did not survive Ragnarok, did not fight beside you against Thanos, to surrender to an empire of fearful men hiding behind Stormtrooper armor. Bruce entered the command center, still weak but determined. The Hulk's ready. I can't control what happens once he's out, but... He looked at the fleet on the display. I think for this, we don't need control. We need rage. Leia approached Steve, her expression conflicted. You don't have to do this. You're not sworn to the rebellion. You don't owe us your lives. We owe those 3,000 people on Coruscant, Steve said. We can't bring them back, but we can make sure their deaths meant something. That the rebellion survives to finish what they started. He picked up his shield. How many transports need to evacuate? 23, Draven reported. Each needs 5 minutes to launch and reach hyperspace distance. That's 2 hours, Steve calculated. We need to hold for 2 hours. Against that fleet? An officer's voice cracked. That's impossible. Steve smiled grimly. Good. We specialize in impossible. The plan was insane because it had to be. Thor would engage the Executor directly, not to destroy it, but to damage it enough to slow the fleet's advance. Tony would coordinate the rebel fighter wings, his tactical AI giving them targeting data and maneuvers no organic pilot could calculate. Natasha and Clint would lead ground defenses, preparing for the inevitable landing parties. Bruce would wait in reserve until they needed the Hulk's raw power. And Steve? Steve would do what he always did. Lead from the front and inspire people to be better than they thought possible. The first wave of TIE fighters hit Yavin 4's atmosphere 30 minutes later. X-Wings and Y-Wings rose to meet them, pilots who knew they were flying to their deaths but did it anyway, because that's what the rebellion meant, sacrifice for something greater than yourself. Tony, flying formation with his damaged armor, fed targeting data to every fighter. Gold Leader, you've got 3 on your 6. Break left on my mark. Mark. The X-Wing pilot followed instructions, and the pursuing TIEs flew into Clint's explosive arrows, detonating in spectacular fireballs. This is insane, the pilot transmitted. How are you calculating these vectors? I've got the best AI in the galaxy and nothing left to lose, Tony replied. Just follow my lead. Thor descended from the clouds like a meteor wrapped in lightning, Mjolnir leading as he aimed directly at the Executor's bridge. The Superstar Destroyer's point defense turrets opened fire, filling space with enough energy to vaporize a fleet. Thor flew through it all, his Asgardian durability absorbing impacts that would destroy starships. He struck the bridge tower with the force of a tactical nuke. Transparent steel shattered, atmosphere vented, and systems across 3 decks failed catastrophically. But the Executor was built to withstand battleship-grade weapons. One Asgardian, even one as powerful as Thor, couldn't destroy it alone. What he could do was make them angry. All batteries, concentrate fire on that target, the Executor's captain ordered, his voice shaking as he watched a single being tear through their defenses. Thousands of turbo lasers focused on Thor. The concentration of firepower was beyond anything the Avengers had faced. Energy equivalent to nuclear weapons, sustained fire that could melt mountains. Thor summoned every bit of Asgardian magic, every lightning bolt, every ounce of divine strength. He held for 30 seconds. Then the assault drove him back, his armor cracked in bleeding atmosphere, his body pushed beyond even godly limits. He fell through Yavin 4's atmosphere, a smoking streak that impacted in the jungle like a fallen star. But those 30 seconds were enough. The Executor was damaged, its assault slowed, and the other Star Destroyers had to maneuver around the flagship's crippled advance. On the ground, Natasha and Clint prepared for the landing parties they knew were coming. Imperial assault shuttles were already descending, carrying stormtroopers and AT-STs. The jungle would be their battlefield, a place where numbers meant less and skill mattered more. Just like Budapest, Natasha said, checking her weapons. Budapest was a vacation compared to this, Clint replied, but he was smiling. the grim humor of soldiers facing impossible odds. The stormtroopers advanced in textbook formation, white armor stark against green jungle. They'd been trained for every environment, every tactical situation. But they'd never fought two SHIELD agents who'd perfected the art of asymmetric warfare. Natasha moved like a ghost through the undergrowth, her attacks coming from impossible angles. A stormtrooper would feel the briefest touch, then collapse with precisely damaged armor joints. Clint's arrows rained from the canopy, each one finding a target. Weapons destroyed, communications disabled, officers eliminated with surgical precision. They couldn't win. There were too many. But they could make every meter cost the Empire dearly. In the command center, Steve coordinated the defense with rebel commanders, his tactical genius and their knowledge of local conditions creating synergy neither could achieve alone. He watched the battle unfold on holographic displays, saw his friends pushing themselves beyond human limits, and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like it had 100 times before. Transport 7 through 12 away, an officer reported. 15 minutes to hyperspace distance. Not fast enough. Steve could see it in the numbers. The Empire was tightening the noose, establishing orbital superiority, positioning for a final bombardment that would end everything. "Sir, the Executor is hailing us," a communications officer said. "They're demanding our surrender." Steve knew who would be on the other end of that call. "Put him through." Darth Vader's masked face appeared on the holographic display, his respirator marking steady rhythm. "Captain Rogers, your resistance is admirable but pointless. Surrender now and I will be merciful. Your friends will die quickly rather than slowly." "That's not mercy," Steve said. "That's just murder with better marketing. You destroyed the Imperial Palace. You killed thousands. You stole from the Emperor himself." Vader's voice carried no emotion, just cold statement of fact. "There is no outcome where you survive this day." "Maybe not," Steve admitted. "But we'll buy enough time for people who deserve a future to escape. That's good enough. Heroic, foolish, but heroic." Vader seemed almost thoughtful. "In another life, Captain, we might have been allies. Your conviction, your willingness to sacrifice for others, these are qualities I once possessed. But conviction without power is meaningless, and you have learned the limits of your power." "I've learned that power without purpose is tyranny," Steve countered. "And I've learned that even against impossible odds, people can choose to do the right thing. That's the one power you'll never have, the power to make people believe." Vader was silent for a long moment. Then, "You will die believing then. All weapons, fire." The Executor's main batteries opened up. Turbo laser bolts the size of buildings rained down on Yavin 4, each one carrying megaton-scale destruction. The jungle evaporated, ancient temples were reduced to glass, and rebel defensive positions vanished in waves of superheated plasma. "Shields failing," an officer screamed as the command center shook. "All remaining fighters, retreat to hyperspace," Dodonna ordered. "We've lost. Everyone evacuate." "Not everyone," Bruce said quietly. He looked at Steve, and in that look was everything they'd never said. All the fear, the friendship, the shared burden of being monsters in heroes' skin. "The Hulk can take it, the bombardment, long enough for the last transports." "Bruce, no. It's okay, Steve." Bruce smiled, genuinely smiled, and for the first time since Coruscant, looked at peace. This is what the Hulk was made for. Not fighting villains or smashing robots. This, protecting people when no one else can. He walked out into the bombardment, his transformation already beginning. Skin turned green, muscles expanded, and Bruce Banner disappeared as the Hulk emerged. But this time, there was clarity in those gamma-green eyes. Purpose. Hulk. Protect. Friends. He stood in the center of the bombardment zone, a 3-meter giant against orbital fire. Turbo-laser bolts struck him. Each impact that would vaporize buildings turned stone to molten slag. The Hulk didn't dodge. He didn't try to fight back. He simply endured, his body absorbing punishment that would destroy armies, his gamma-enhanced healing factor working overtime to repair tissue faster than it could be destroyed. He held for 5 minutes, then 10. His skin was burning, his healing factor struggling, but he wouldn't fall. Couldn't fall. Not while people still needed time. On the Executor's bridge, Vader watched in cold amazement. What is that creature? Unknown, Lord Vader. But sensors indicate it's absorbing damage that should be lethal. It's protecting the evacuation routes. Vader could sense it through the Force, not the Hulk himself. For gamma radiation existed outside the Force's realm, but the determination, the sacrifice, the pure will to protect others. It reminded him of something long buried. Something Anakin Skywalker might have once understood. Increase firepower, he ordered. But note this in the records. Whatever that being is, it died with honor. The last transport launched, its hyperdrive engaging. The last X-Wings jumped to light speed. And the Hulk, his body more scar tissue than skin, his gamma core barely functioning, finally fell to his knees. Thor appeared beside him, bloodied but unbowed, having fought his way back from where he'd crashed. He lifted the Hulk, somehow, impossibly lifting the massive green giant, and carried him toward where Tony waited with the last evacuation shuttle. Time to go, big guy, Thor said gently. You did it. Everyone's safe. Steve, Natasha, and Clint were already aboard. Tony's armor was held together more by Jarvis's optimism than actual structural integrity. But they were alive, and the rebellion had escaped. The shuttle lifted off as the final bombardment reduced Yavin 4's base to molten craters. They jumped to hyperspace with Imperial fighters seconds behind them, escaping by margins measured in heartbeats. In the medical bay of the rebellion's new hidden base, a fleet in deep space, constantly moving, Bruce finally woke 3 days later. The Hulk had reverted, leaving Bruce Banner covered in scars, but alive. Did they make it? He asked immediately. Every transport, Steve said, relief evident in his voice. Every fighter, every person on that base survived because of you. Bruce closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. Then maybe those people on Coruscant weren't in vain. Tony entered, his armor in pieces, but Jarvis intact. I've been analyzing the data. The dimensional technology, I think I can build it. It'll take time, resources, and about a dozen engineering miracles, but we might get home, Natasha finished. Yeah. Tony looked at his team, battered, scarred, changed by everything they'd experienced. Question is, what do we do until then? The rebellion needs us. This war isn't over. Steve stood, his shield dented but unbroken. Then we fight. We help end this war the right way. Not through terror or assassination, but by giving people hope. By showing the Empire that no matter how many Star Destroyers they have, they can't kill the idea of freedom. Thor hefted Mjolnir. Aye. We are Avengers. Wherever we are, whichever realm we find ourselves in, we stand against tyranny. Clint strung his bow. Guess we're rebels now. Better than retirement. Natasha checked her weapons. The Empire wanted a war with Earth's mightiest heroes. Let's give them one they'll never forget. In his throne room on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine meditated on the disturbance these warriors represented. They'd invaded his palace, stolen his secrets, and escaped with their lives. They'd inspired the rebellion, given them victories that should have been impossible. But the dark side was patient. It always won in the end. "Lord Vader," he called, "these Avengers have proven themselves worthy adversaries. But they are still bound by sentiment, by their attachments to each other. That is their weakness." "What are your orders, my master?" Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed with malevolent intelligence. "We will use their compassion against them, their need to protect others. We will force them to choose between their desire to go home and their noble intentions to save this galaxy." He smiled, expression without warmth or humanity. "And when they choose wrong, as heroes always do, we will destroy them and everyone they sought to protect." The war continued. The Avengers fought alongside the rebellion, winning victories and suffering defeats, becoming legends in a galaxy far from home. And somewhere in Tony's workshop, a dimensional gateway slowly took shape. Their path home, if they could survive long enough to use it. But that was a story for another time. The galaxy would remember them. 6 warriors from another reality who appeared when the darkness seemed insurmountable, who fought with powers that defied understanding, who stood against the Empire not because they had to, but because they chose to. They called them the Avengers. These strange champions who wielded hammers that called lightning, shields that defied physics, armor that thought for itself, rage that couldn't be killed, and skills honed through lives of sacrifice. They became symbols, proof that tyranny could be resisted, that heroes could emerge from anywhere, that the Empire's seemingly infinite power had limits. Some said they were sent by the Force itself, manifestations of balance in a galaxy tilted toward darkness. Others claimed they were simply warriors doing what warriors do, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The truth was both simpler and more complex. They were people, far from home, trying to do right in a galaxy they barely understood. The Empire hunted them. Vader pursued them across star systems, each encounter a battle that shook planets. The Emperor offered bounties that could buy fleets. But the Avengers endured, not because they were invincible, but because they refused to quit. In the end, their greatest victory wasn't in battles won or ships destroyed. It was in the hope they inspired, the proof that even the mightiest empire could be challenged, that even the darkest nights ended with dawn. Tony Stark continued building his dimensional gateway, working with rebel scientists to merge Earth technology with galactic engineering. Each day brought them closer to home, closer to the universe they'd left behind. But each day also brought more rebels who needed help, more people crying out against Imperial oppression. Steve Rogers led strike teams that became legendary, his tactical genius and unshakable courage turning impossible missions into improbable victories. Thor walked among the downtrodden, offering strength and showing that power could be wielded with compassion. The Hulk became a symbol of protection, the green giant who appeared when all seemed lost. Natasha and Clint moved through shadows, their skills making them ghosts that the Empire learned to fear. They never forgot the cost. The thousands on Coruscant who died in the palace explosion haunted their dreams. But they honored those deaths by ensuring the rebellion survived, by giving meaning to sacrifice through continued resistance. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Darth Vader meditated on these warriors who fought without the Force yet challenged his power. Part of him, the part that remembered being Anakin Skywalker, respected their conviction. But Vader had no room for such sentiment. They were threats to the Empire, and threats had to be eliminated. The Emperor, ever patient, watched and planned. These Avengers were powerful, yes, but power could be turned, corrupted, destroyed. It was only a matter of finding the right lever, the right pressure point. Everyone broke eventually, even heroes. But the Avengers had faced Thanos. They'd endured the impossible and prevailed. A galactic emperor, however powerful, was just another tyrant to be toppled. The war raged on, but in taverns and rebel cells, in whispered conversations and transmitted broadcasts, people spoke of the Avengers. And when the Empire seemed too strong, when despair threatened to overwhelm hope, someone would remember 6 warriors who came from beyond the stars and proved that no empire, no matter how powerful, could extinguish the light of freedom. The Force may bind the galaxy together, but courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender in the face of evil, those were universal truths that transcended any one reality. And as long as people believed in those truths, tyranny would never have the final word.